Chapter 1340. In the starry sky, Yixian tightly hugged Moon Yanyan, sobbing like a child. In his embrace, Moon Yanyan had already stopped breathing. As if he had thought of something, Yixian took out all the violet energy he had for Moon Yanyan to absorb. However, it was useless. The moment the violet energy entered Moon Yanyan's body, it automatically dispersed. Seeing this, Yixian sat paralyzed in the starry sky. His eyes were empty, as if he had lost his soul. At this time, a white figure suddenly appeared not far away from Yixian. This white figure was Linge, who had been following Moon Yanyan all this time. Yixian suddenly looked at Linge. She didn't die, right? Linge held Moon Yanyan's hand and softly said, "She is already dead." Yixian's voice trembled. How is that possible? Sister Nian is so strong. She only used 30% of her strength to seriously injure a Dao ancestor. How could she die? Impossible. Linge glanced at Yixian. On her face, 2 streams of clear liquid slowly flowed. 90,000 years. She used her body to suppress the 5th dimension for 90,000 years. Every time the 5th dimension tribulation came, she was the one who endured it. Although she suppressed the 5th dimension tribulation, she suffered a backlash. Yixian tightly hugged Moon Yanyan. His body could not stop trembling. How could you be so stupid? Linge softly said, just like she said, this was her own choice. She chose death. For you, for the 5th dimension. Yixian looked at Linge. Linge wiped the tears on her face. In fact, the 5th dimension tribulation can no longer be suppressed. The more it is suppressed, the greater the backlash will be in the future. Therefore, she chose to let the 5th dimension tribulation come early. With that, she looked down and softly said, the reason why the 5th dimension tribulation has not completely erupted is because she is suppressing it. In other words, she withstood at least 90% of the 5th dimension tribulation's power. You saw her weak before not because she made a move, but because her body was withstanding the 5th dimension tribulation. Yixian looked at Linge. She could withstand it before, so why couldn't she withstand it this time? Linge looked at Yixian. Because this time, there is a man-made disaster. Yixian slowly closed his eyes. Doubting. Linge continued, you don't need to blame yourself too much. This is her choice. She chose to save the 5th dimension. If she doesn't choose the 5-dimensional universe, the Dao court won't be able to do anything to her. If she doesn't give up on the 5-dimensional universe, her injuries will only worsen. Yixian shook his head. You're wrong. Linge looked at Yixian. Yixian said softly, she went to doubting for me. If she didn't go to doubting, she wouldn't have died, right? Linge looked at Yixian. She clenched her fists as tears poured out of her eyes. It's you. If not for you, she wouldn't have died. With that, she suddenly knelt down in front of Moon Yanyan's body. She clutched Moon Yanyan tightly and wailed, you fool! I've already told you to stay out of his business, but you just wouldn't listen. He's a person with a calamity cause. At the side, Yixian's eyes were empty, as if he had lost his soul. 2 streams of clear liquid flowed down his face. Linge suddenly looked at Yixian. She stared at Yixian. Do you know why she went to doubting? Because she wanted to buy time for you. And now, she used her life to buy time for you for half a year. If not for you, although she would have been seriously injured, she wouldn't have died. It's you're the one who killed her. Yixian hugged Moon Yanyan tightly. I'm sorry. Linge still wanted to say something. At this time, Yixian's black hair began to turn white. In just a few breaths, Yixian's black hair had turned snow white. Seeing this, Linge was stunned. She didn't say anything. At this time, Yixian suddenly picked up Moon Yanyan. He gently stroked Moon Yanyan's messy hair and grinned. Sister Nian, let's go home. Back to the 5-dimensional universe. Yixian carried Moon Yanyan's body and walked down. Yixian brought Moon Yanyan's body to the 5-dimensional universe. After arriving in the 5-dimensional universe, Moon Yanyan's body gradually became illusory. In her body, a force spread out and finally dissipated between heaven and earth like a light breeze. That was Moon Yanyan's soul power. Yi Xian wanted to catch it, but it was impossible, not even with the soul-suppressing sword. In Little Soul's words, this soul has dispersed. After Moon Yanyan's soul dispersed between heaven and earth, her body suddenly changed. In the end, the Moon Yanyan in Yi Xian's arms turned into a pure white kitten. Seeing this scene, Yi Xian was stunned. At this moment, he finally understood why Moon Yanyan liked to eat fish so much. Yi Xian brought Moon Yanyan to the starry sky where she often roasted fish. It was very quiet here. He placed Moon Yanyan's body in the starry sky. From this position, he could overlook the five-dimensional universe below. The body was buried in the starry sky. The soul returned to heaven and earth. Yi Xian looked at Moon Yanyan. After a long time, he smiled and said, "Sister Nian, have a good rest." With that, he turned and left. And he was not going back to the five-dimensional universe. On the side, Ling said with a trembling voice, "Where are you going?" Yi Xian did not turn his head. Ling was about to say something when a black object suddenly fell in front of her. Prison pagoda. Yi Xian left behind the prison pagoda. What was he going to do? Ling was somewhat confused. At this time, Big Sister's voice suddenly sounded from inside the prison pagoda. "Not good, he's going to do something stupid. Quickly stop him." Ling was stunned. Then she hurriedly chased after him. However, Yi Xian had already disappeared into the starry sky. Ling angrily roared at the starry sky, "You're going to die." In the depths of the starry sky, a voice slowly floated over, "Then die." Yi Xian once again arrived in front of the heavenly gate. One person, one sword. Just as Yi Xian arrived in front of the heavenly gate, Bai Dizzy appeared in front of him. Bai Dizzy looked at the white-haired Yi Xian and shook his head. "Stupid! Haven't you heard that 10 years is not too late for a gentleman to take revenge? Coming here now is very stupid." 10 years? Yi Xian grinned. "This daddy can't wait that long." As his voice fell, a blood-red aura suddenly swept out from his body. Bang! In an instant, the sky above the heavenly gate turned blood-red. Bloodline activation. At this moment, Yi Xian completely entered a crazed state. This time, he did not rely on the sword spirit. That was the only thought in Yi Xian's mind. After he completely activated the power of the bloodline, the sword spirit in his hand also turned blood red at this moment. Usually, he was unable to unleash the sword spirit's power. However, after the bloodline activation, he could unleash at least 30% of the sword spirit's power. The crazier the owner of this sword, the stronger it was. Seeing Yi Xian's aura skyrocket, Bai Dizzy frowned slightly. The power of the bloodline was a little beyond his expectations. At this moment, a man suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. This person was God General Xian Yong. Looking at the blood-red Yi Xian, Xian Yong gradually frowned. At this moment, Yi Xian made him feel danger. The stronger the murderous intent, the stronger the power of the bloodline. At this moment, Yi Xian's murderous intent had never been so strong. At this moment, only killing intent remained in Yi Xian's mind. Yi Xian suddenly vanished on the spot. Xian Yong's eyes narrowed slightly as he stabbed his halberd forward. Bang! An expanse of blood-red light suddenly erupted, and then Xian Yong was instantly pushed over 1 kilometer back. As soon as he stopped moving, the halberd in his hand had suddenly cracked apart. Bai Dizzy frowned slightly when he witnessed this scene. Xian Yong gazed at Yi Xian with a trace of disbelief in his eyes. Suddenly, Yi Xian roared furiously, "Kill!" As soon as he finished speaking, a ray of blood-red light suddenly arrived in front of Xian Yong. Xian Yong's eyes narrowed slightly as he raised his halberd to block it. Bang! An explosion resounded as Xian Yong was pushed 3 kilometers back. This time, the halberd in his hand had been slashed into pieces. Xian Yong raised his head to gaze at Yi Xian. In the end, his gaze descended onto the sword in Yi Xian's grasp. What sort of sword is that? It was actually able to shatter me. Right at this moment, Yi Xian vanished on the spot again. Xian Yong's pupils constricted, and then he clenched his right hand into a fist and smashed it forward. At the instant he punched forward, the the space in front of him had instantly transformed into a strange vortex. A strand of obliterating energy swept out from within the vortex, and it collided head-on with Yi Xian's blood-red ray of light. Rumble! An expanse of blood-red light suddenly erupted from the heaven entrance, and then a figure retreated repeatedly. It was Xian Yong. Xian Yong hadn't even stopped moving when Yi Xian slashed once more. A wisp of ferocity flashed through Xian Yong's eyes, and then he clenched his fists tightly and smashed them forward. Rumble! The space in the surroundings suddenly trembled violently while Xian Yong instantly retreated explosively. At this moment, his strength had been directly suppressed by the energy of Yi Xian's bloodline and sword Dao. Bai Dizzy's face fell when he witnessed this scene. He noticed that Yi Xian's aura was growing stronger and stronger. What sort of bloodline is this? Right at this moment, Yi Xian suddenly vanished with his blood-red sword in hand. Bai Dizzy's expression changed drastically, and he hurriedly said, "Watch out." On the other side, Xian Yong seemed to have sensed something, and his pupils had suddenly constricted to the size of needles. He swiftly swept his arms forward, and a strand of formidable force swept out from within him like a volcanic eruption, using defense as offense. Meanwhile, two mysterious forces suddenly enveloped the surroundings. The sword domain and blood domain. The sword domain and blood domain were countless times stronger than before, especially the blood domain. After Yi Xian activated the energy of his bloodline, the blood domain was unprecedentedly strong. A strand of blood-red ray of light suddenly slashed down from within the blood domain. The energy that Xian Yong had released was directly shattered by this sword. At the same time, Yi Xian's sword slashed directly into the top of Xian Yong's head, and Xian Yong's body was directly cut into two. Xian Yong's soul was just about to flee when the sword in Yi Xian's hand had suddenly transformed into the soul-quelling sword, and the soul-quelling sword directly entered the space between the brows of Xian Yong's soul. Bang! Xian Yong's formidable soul was directly absorbed. A sword slashed through the body. A sword slashed through the soul. Yi Xian gestured with his right hand, and the soul-quelling sword flew back into his hand. Then, he raised the sword and killed his way into the heaven gate without looking back. Behind him was a sea of blood. Killing intent arose, and the world was slaughtered. If he didn't go mad, he wouldn't survive. Chapter 1341. In front of the heavenly gate, Bai Dizzy looked at the dismembered Xian Yong with an extremely ugly expression. He did not expect that Yi Xian would become so powerful after activating the power of his bloodline. He had killed a divine general. At this moment, Bai Dizzy's eyes were solemn. The Dao Ting was currently empty because Luo Ho had personally led the army of the Dao Tomb, so most of the experts of the Dao Ting had gone to the celestial abyss. As if he had thought of something, Bai Dizzy suddenly said, "Quickly recall the 4 heavenly kings." A voice rang out behind Bai Dizzy. "Yes, sir." At this moment, a heavenly general suddenly appeared in front of Bai Dizzy. He bowed respectfully and said in a trembling voice, "Sir, Yi Xian has already killed his way into the first heaven." Hearing this, Bai Dizzy narrowed his eyes and was about to speak when another heavenly general appeared in front of Bai Dizzy. "Sir, Yi Xian has already killed his way into the 6th heaven." Bai Dizzy was speechless. At this moment, Yi Xian had already killed his way into the 11th heaven. In fact, there was originally a super expert guarding each of the 36 heavens. However, Moon Yanyan had already killed the expert guarding the 36 heavens. In addition, most of the super experts of the Doubting were in the celestial abyss, so Yi Xian was almost invincible along the way. He killed his way to the 11th heaven, and during this period he had killed at least 1,000 heavenly generals. They were all instant kills. At this moment, the power of his sword was difficult to resist even for Dao confirmation experts. Soon Yi Xian killed his way to the 20th heaven, and at this moment, the experts he encountered were all Dao confirmation experts. However, these Dao confirmation experts were still unable to stop him. Moon Yanyan only killed the strongest experts of each heaven, but Yi Xian was different. He killed everyone he saw. It could be said that he had killed almost all the experts of each heaven. Under such a massacre, Yi Xian's killing intent grew stronger and stronger. Just as Yi Xian arrived at the 21st heaven, Bai Dizzy suddenly appeared in front of him. Bai Dizzy stared at Yi Xian. At this moment he was extremely shocked, because he noticed that Yi Xian's aura was at least twice as strong as when he was in the heavenly gate. This guy was getting stronger and stronger. How could this be? Bai Dizzy looked at Yi Xian. Soon he discovered the crux of the problem. The power of bloodline. Yi Xian's bloodline power was getting stronger and stronger. What kind of bloodline power was this? Bai Dizzy frowned slightly. He'd investigated Yi Xian earlier, but he'd neglected Yi Xian's bloodline. Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly looked at Bai Dizzy. He was about to attack when a furious shout resounded from afar. "How dare you!" As soon as the voice resounded, a ray of black light flashed. Yi Xian turned around and slashed down with his sword. Bang! That black light directly exploded, and Yi Xian also retreated more than 100 feet. A robust middle-aged man stood in front of Yi Xian. The middle-aged man wore golden armor, held a golden hammer in his left hand, and held an umbrella in his right. It was one of the 4 heavenly kings of Daoist, Multilore. Bai Dizzy frowned slightly when he saw Multilore. "Multilore, why are you alone?" Multilore glanced at Bai Dizzy. "Star-Lord, the battle at the celestial abyss is very intense." Bai Dizzy's face sank when he heard this. Meanwhile, Multilore looked at Yi Xian. "I alone am enough to kill this kid." Bai Dizzy looked at Multilore. "Don't be careless and underestimate him." Multilore laughed. "I know." As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly leaped up and smashed his hammer down at Yi Xian. The 22 levels of the celestial abyss trembled violently like an earthquake, and it was extremely shocking. Yi Xian suddenly raised his head, and his eyes were like a sea of blood that struck fear into the hearts of others. Yi Xian didn't dodge, and he just stabbed with his sword. In an instant, a blood technique drowned him and Multilore. Bang! Along with a loud bang that shook the heavens, a figure retreated rapidly, and he retreated for an entire 300 m. It was Yi Xian. Within that bloody light, Multilore casually swung his hammer, and the bloody light was instantly dispersed. Multilore looked into the distance and sneered. "This kid has some ability to actually be able to take my punch head-on." Again. As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly vanished on the spot, and in the next moment, a golden hammer suddenly smashed down from above Yi Xian's head. Under this hammer strike, the space around Yi Xian directly warped. Yi Xian suddenly raised his head and roared furiously. A bloody light shot into the sky from his body, and this bloody light actually forcefully blocked that shocking hammer strike. Multilore's expression changed at the sight of this. What kind of bloodline power is this? At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly vanished on the spot. Multilore's eyes narrowed slightly, and he suddenly swung his hammer horizontally to the side. Bang! A bloody light suddenly exploded from the golden hammer, and Multilore instantly retreated explosively. At this moment, Yi Xian pressed forward, and in an instant, countless bloody sword lights drowned Multilore. Boom! 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 Explosions resounded incessantly in the 21st level of heaven. Even though Yi Xian hadn't been able to instantly kill Multilore, he'd been able to suppress him. Bai Dizzy's expression grew even more unsightly at the sight of this. At this moment, Yi Xian was a little ridiculously strong. After all, Multilore had encountered a realm. But Yi Xian was actually able to rely on this bloodline power to fight Multilore that was 2 realms above him. This wasn't just heaven-defying, it was abnormal. Bloodline power. Bai Dizzy stared fixedly at Yi Xian. He knew that Dao Yi's bloodline power was very special and extremely powerful. However, he'd never seen or even heard of a bloodline like Yi Xian's. Suddenly, a huge explosion resounded from afar, and it interrupted Bai Dizzy's thoughts. He looked towards the distance and saw that Multilore had actually been pushed over 1 kilometer back, and he was surrounded by boundless blood-red sword energy. Multilore suddenly opened the umbrella in his right hand, and then countless strands of golden light surged out from within it. This. In an instant, countless strands of blood-red sword chi were torn apart by the golden light, and the sound of something being torn apart resounded incessantly. On the other hand, Yi Xian was blasted back repeatedly by the golden light, and he was pushed back by almost 3 kilometers. When he stopped moving, there was a huge golden net in front of him. Multilor suddenly shook the umbrella in his hand. Retract. Bang. The umbrella shook violently, and then the huge golden net suddenly moved towards Yi Xian. Yi Xian stood on the spot, and he suddenly stabbed with his sword when the golden net arrived in front of him. It was a single strike that contained 3 domains. Bang. The golden net was forcefully stopped by Yi Xian's attack. Right at this moment, the umbrella in Polylor's hand suddenly vanished. In the next moment, countless strands of golden energy slashed towards Yi Xian. This. The blood-red light around Yi Xian exploded apart inch by inch. At the same time, Multilor suddenly appeared above Yi Xian, and the golden hammer in his hand smashed down. As soon as the hammer descended, the space around Yi Xian warped into a strange shape. Yi Xian raised his head, and then 2 rays of blood-red light suddenly slashed forward. Bang! The 2 rays of sword energy struck the golden hammer, causing it to tremble violently. However, it merely stopped for a moment, and it wasn't able to stop the hammer from descending. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly stabbed the golden hammer with his sword. It was a head-on collision. Rumble! The entire 21st level of heaven suddenly trembled violently. The multitude heavenly king retreated rapidly in the air, while Yi Xian retreated nearly 1,000 feet. Suddenly, Yi Xian roared furiously. He leaped up with his sword in hand and slashed towards Multilor. Multilor's expression changed, and he raised the umbrella in his hand. Bang! A wave of blood-red light erupted from the top of the umbrella. Crack! The treasured umbrella immediately cracked open. Polylor's expression changed drastically at the sight of this, and he subconsciously put away his umbrella. At this moment, Yi Xian's sword stabbed towards his forehead. Polylor didn't choose to retreat, nor could he. He swung his golden hammer horizontally, and this swing was aimed directly at Yi Xian's head. A life for a life. Yi Xian didn't put his sword away. Multilor didn't put his hammer away either. Hiss! Yi Xian's sword stabbed into Multilor's throat, but Multilor's hammer stopped a few inches away from Yi Xian's head, because a sword had blocked this hammer strike. Soul-suppressing sword. Soul-suppressing sword had attacked by itself, and it had nothing to do with Yi Xian. The spirit sword was protecting its master. Yi Xian's soul-suppressing sword was no ordinary soul-suppressing sword. After absorbing the souls of countless powerhouses, the sword had proven itself. Even without Yi Xian, it was still comparable to a Dao validation powerhouse. At this time, Yi Xian suddenly put away his sword spirit, and it turned back into soul-suppressing sword. He stabbed the sword into the center of Multilor's forehead once more. Boom! In the blink of an eye, Multilor's soul was absorbed. Dual swords. One sword to cut the body. One sword to shatter the soul. When he saw Multilor's death, Dizzy slowly clenched his right hand. He didn't attack. Because he was a Star Lord, one of the few people in the Doubting who wasn't good at fighting. He was a civil official in the Doubting and was in charge of the Doubting's affairs. As for fighting, it wasn't something he was good at. Of course, it wasn't that he didn't know how to fight, he just wasn't good at it. Yi Xian put away soul-suppressing sword, and he took a deep breath. In an instant, Multilor's blood was directly absorbed by him. Along the way, he had absorbed the blood of every single person he killed. Soul-suppressing sword absorbed souls, and he devoured blood. After absorbing Multilor's blood, Yi Xian turned to look at Dizzy. Dizzy took a deep look at Yi Xian, and quietly disappeared. Yi Xian carried the 2 swords and continued forward. Soon, he arrived at the 22nd heaven, and there was no one in the 22nd heaven. Previously, Dizzy had already ordered everyone in the 22nd heaven to retreat. Those people staying in the 22nd heaven would be sending them to their deaths. Seeing that there was no one in the 22nd heaven, Yi Xian continued forward. This time he moved faster. In front of the heavenly gate, Dizzy suddenly looked at a heavenly general. Go to the 2 worlds abyss and tell true martial divine lord that Multilor is dead. The heavenly general bowed respectfully and quietly left. Bai Dizzy looked at the 36th heaven and said, I want to know where this person's bloodline comes from. Quickly investigate. Sir. A voice came from not far behind Bai Dizzy. Bai Dizzy slowly closed his eyes. Weeds must be cut by the roots. P.S. Asking for votes. Chapter 1342. At this moment, Yi Xian had already killed his way to the 27th heaven. Now Yi Xian was covered in blood. Massacre. Yi Xian himself did not realize that the stronger the killing intent in his mind, the more terrifying the power of bloodline was. Now, the killing intent emitted from his body was unprecedentedly strong, even surpassing his sword intent. Moreover, every time he killed someone, his killing intent and the power of bloodline would increase. The more he killed, the stronger he would become. Grow in the midst of massacre. Of course, he could also die in the midst of massacre. When Yi Xian came here, he had already put his life and death aside. He had come here and completely activated the power of his bloodline just to do one thing: kill. After killing his way to the 27th heaven, those experts did not resist, but retreated. The current Yi Xian was unstoppable. And Yi Xian did not let these people go. Just like that, Yi Xian chased wildly, and the entire 27th heaven was filled with wails. Not long after, Yi Xian killed his way to the 33rd heaven. The spiritual energy here was much denser than below, and there was extremely pure energy of the stars. Yi Xian did not absorb the energy of the stars, but his body was indeed automatically absorbing the pure energy of the stars. After absorbing the energy of the stars, Yi Xian came to the entrance of the 34th heaven. At this moment, the blood sword in his hand trembled slightly. Yi Xian stopped. The sword spirit stopped Yi Xian. Yi Xian stood at the entrance in silence for a moment, then he turned and left. After Yi Xian left the 36th heaven, he came to a stretch of clouds. From his position, above those clouds, there were floating palaces. Doubting heaven palaces were 36, and 72 treasure halls were 72. Yi Xian suddenly disappeared on the spot. His target was the head of the treasure halls, Ling Shao Hall. The Ling Shao Hall was where the Dao ancestor resided. However, Yi Xian did not let go of the great halls and heavenly palaces he passed by. Wherever he went, there was chaos. Seeing Yi Xian rush to the numinous sky palace, Bai Dizzy's expression changed instantly. He had previously ordered the doubting powerhouses to avoid Yi Xian and not fight to the death with Yi Xian. They were to wait for the doubting powerhouses to return from the dual realm abyss. But now, he did not expect Yi Xian to go to Lingshao Hall. That was the place where the Dao ancestor lived. It was the dignity of the doubting. Bai Dizzy suddenly said, "Where are the 36 celestial stars?" Chi 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 chi. In an instant, streams of light shot into the sky from the doubting. Soon, the 36 superpowerhouses suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. Bai Dizzy was about to speak, but Yi Xian suddenly turned into a sword light and disappeared on the spot. In the distance, the 36 superpowerhouses suddenly turned into 36 streams of light and shot toward Yi Xian. In the clouds, Yi Xian suddenly slashed down with his sword. A stretch of sword light and a heavenly waterfall swept down from the sky. Bai Dizzy's expression changed drastically when he saw this. Yi Xian had become stronger again. At this moment, a dazzling blood light suddenly burst out from the sky. Under this blood light, the 36 superpowerhouses were shaken and retreated repeatedly. A single sword strike had forced back 36 Dao validation powerhouses. Seeing that the 36 superpowerhouses still wanted to attack, Bai Dizzy suddenly said angrily, "Don't attack, retreat." At this moment, he'd noticed that Dao validation realm experts were utterly unable to harm Yi Xian. These 36 Dao validation realm experts had limitless futures, so they absolutely couldn't be allowed to die here. At the very least, they couldn't be allowed to die for nothing. The 36 celestial stars were just about to retreat when Yi Xian suddenly vanished on the spot. A strand of blood-red light flashed through the battlefield. The expressions of the 36 experts changed drastically when they witnessed this scene, and they retreated explosively. However, Yi Xian's sword was even swifter than them. Yi Xian's sword pierced through the throat of one of the experts in the lead, and then his head instantly flew into the air while a strand of blood sprayed from it. Moreover, his soul and blood were instantly absorbed by Yi Xian. In the next moment, Yi Xian vanished on the spot again. It didn't take long for the sound of ripping to resound, and every single ripping sound was accompanied by a head flying into the air. They were bound to die as soon as they appeared here, because their speed wasn't as fast as Yi Xian at all. Bai Dizzy stared fixedly at the blood-red light in the sky with an extremely unsightly expression on his face, because he noticed that Yi Xian was much stronger than he was a moment ago. Exactly what sort of bloodline is that? Bai Dizzy's heart was filled with questions, because the people he'd sent still hadn't replied to him. This meant that they still hadn't found him. But with the strength that Dao Ting possessed, that was utterly impossible. Even Dao Ting had a pretty good understanding of the Dao Tomb, let alone a human at the self-release realm. At this moment, Yi Xian, who was far away in the sky, suddenly stopped. Around him were 36 withered corpses. Yi Xian's eyes were closed tightly while strands of formidable killing intent surged incessantly around him. The killing intent was so strong that it had completely crushed his sword intent. Moreover, killing people wasn't able to vent his anger. Conversely, it caused his killing intent to grow stronger and stronger. Even if he slaughtered all the worlds in the universe, it wouldn't be able to quench the hatred in his heart. Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly vanished on the spot, and the palaces in the distance were reduced to nothingness by the blood-red sword light. In a short while, Yi Xian arrived before the firmament hall. The firmament hall was made of glass, and it was 300 m tall and extremely dazzling. Behind Yi Xian was a ground full of corpses. Yi Xian looked at the firmament hall and suddenly slashed with his sword. Everywhere the sword light passed, a sea of blood was left. Just as the blood-red sword light was about to strike the firmament hall, a ray of gold light suddenly struck the blood-red sword light. Bang! The sword light and the blood-red sword light shattered at the same time. On Yi Xian's right stood a man in golden armor and a longbow in his hand. One of the doubting divine generals. Farewell. Wanbi looked at Yi Xian expressionlessly. At this moment, Bai Dizzy instantly heaved a sigh of relief. As if he thought of something, he suddenly said, "Divine General, farewell, just hold this person back. Don't fight him head-on." Wanbi glanced at Bai Dizzy and said, "Lord Bai Xing, is he the one who killed Xian Yong?" Bai Dizzy nodded. "Yes. This person's bloodline power is extremely special. His current strength has increased by at least 10 times. Although he's at the self-release realm, with this bloodline power and the sword in his hand, his current combat strength isn't any weaker than a Dao-controlling realm expert." Wanbi glanced at the sword in Yi Xian's hand and said softly, "This sword," Bai Dizzy said solemnly, "the strength of this sword lies in the realm, not the body. This sword shouldn't be his sword. I wonder if it's Moon Yen Yen." At this moment, the distant Yi Xian suddenly turned into a sword light and disappeared. He slashed at Farewell. Farewell's expression was calm. The moment Yi Xian attacked, he suddenly drew his bow and released it. A golden arrow light tore through the air. Boom! This arrow forcibly blocked the distant Yi Xian, but the next moment, Yi Xian disappeared again. The moment Yi Xian disappeared, Farewell also disappeared. As soon as he disappeared, a sword stabbed at his position, and Yi Xian's sword pierced through thin air. The moment Yi Xian was about to withdraw his sword, a long arrow tore through the air and shot straight at his forehead. Yi Xian blocked it with his sword. Boom! The arrow was blocked, but Yi Xian retreated several hundred feet. The moment he stopped, another arrow tore through the air. And as soon as he stopped, another arrow tore through the air. Yi Xian took a step forward and thrust his sword forward. On the tip of the sword, a beam of sword light suddenly exploded. Along with the explosion, a golden arrow also exploded. However, there was another arrow behind this one. This arrow, Yi Xian was unable to block, and directly pierced his chest. The arrow entered half an inch. At this moment, Yi Xian's powerful physical body showed its effect. Seeing this, Lan Bi in the distance frowned slightly. Such a powerful body, Yi Xian suddenly pulled out the arrow, and a stream of blood spurted out, but he quickly absorbed it. Yi Xian looked up at Farewell in the distance. At this moment, the seriousness in Farewell's eyes increased. Yi Xian suddenly disappeared, and the moment Yi Xian disappeared, Farewell also disappeared once again. Soon, there were many afterimages in the clouds. These afterimages could no longer be distinguished as Yi Xian's or others. In addition, there were also sword light and arrow light. Below, Bai Dizzy's expression was somewhat ugly. Although the two seemed to be equally matched, and neither could do anything to the other, he knew that Yi Xian actually had the upper hand. Right now, Farewell was constantly pulling away from Yi Xian, and once Yi Xian closed in on him, it would be the moment of his defeat. Right now, although Yi Xian could not close the distance, other arrows could not hurt Yi Xian either. Most importantly, Yi Xian was becoming stronger and stronger. If this continued, Farewell would definitely lose. As if thinking of something, Bai Dizzy suddenly turned his head and looked at the end of the horizon. He said softly, "The battle in the Two Realms Abyss is so intense." When he sent someone to pass the news of Polylore's death to true martial Divine Lord, he should have known the seriousness of the matter. But now, the experts of the Two Realms Abyss had not come. This Farewell did not come from the Two Realms Abyss. Before that, Farewell had been in seclusion. When he saw that Yi Xian was coming to Numinous Sky Hall, he had sent someone to forcefully inform Farewell. Now, it was likely that Farewell would not be able to stop Yi Xian. At this moment, the sound of a sword suddenly rang in the sky. Then, a figure retreated rapidly. The person retreating was Farewell. In the process of retreating, Farewell drew his bow again, and more than a dozen arrows shot at Yi Xian from various angles. In the distance, Yi Xian suddenly waved his right hand, and in an instant, more than a dozen swords appeared around him. In the next moment, these swords transformed into more than a dozen beams of sword light and flew out. Sword Kinesis Flight. Sword Kinesis Flight alone could not compete with Farewell's arrows, but with the power of his bloodline and his sword domain, it was completely different. Long-range attack? So could Yi Xian. Pist. Flying swords and flying arrows crisscrossed in the sky above Numinous Sky Hall, and the sound of tearing kept ringing. The battle was in a stalemate. At this moment, Bai Dizzy suddenly turned his head, as if he had seen something. He suddenly breathed a sigh of relief. It's time to end this. At the end of the clouds, a middle-aged man slowly walked over. The middle-aged man held a long sword without a scabbard. The sword was dark purple, and a golden dragon swam along the blade. The sword let out a dragon's roar from time to time. The dragon song sword. This sword contained the dragon's soul. When the sword was swung, the dragon's roar could be heard. Although this sword was only at the Dao validation realm, with the addition of the dragon's soul, the sword's power far surpassed that of ordinary Dao validation realm swords. On the middle-aged man's back, there was a sword case. The sword case was extraordinary. It was made of the dragon's bone and was indestructible. In the sword case, there were 10 divine swords. All 10 divine swords were made of dragon scales, and all of them were at the Dao validation realm. Sealing the Dao. Doubting the dragon-slaying sword Immortal. Doubting the number 1 swordsman. Chapter 1343. Feng Daoxiu. Upon seeing this person, the White Emperor's son heaved a sigh of relief. Feng Daoxiu was not only at the Dao defense realm, but he was also a swordsman and a super swordsman. It could be said that Feng Daoxiu was the most powerful person in doubting except for the white-robed divine general. How could Yi Xian resist Feng Daoxiu in bidding? Feng Daoxiu stopped not far away. He glanced at Yi Xian and then looked at Bai Dizzy. Lord Tai Bai Jinxing, is this person the one? Bai Dizzy nodded. Feng Daoxiu was expressionless. Tell bidding to stop. I want to fight this person one-on-one. Bai Dizzy frowned slightly. Feng Daoxiu is a taboo for a martial artist to look down on his enemy. Feng Daoxiu shook his head. I'm not looking down on him. I just want to fight him one-on-one and have a fair fight. I want to see what this swordsman is capable of. Bai Dizzy shook his head. No, I order you to kill this person immediately. Feng Daoxiu frowned slightly. Bai Dizzy looked at Feng Daoxiu with a cold expression. Do you want me to report you to the true martial god? Feng Daoxiu's expression changed slightly. He did not dare to go against Bai Dizzy. Although Bai Dizzy was not very powerful, his official position was higher than his. Even his superior, the true martial god, had to be polite to Bai Dizzy. Feng Daoxiu cupped his fists. I'll do it. After that, he looked at Yi Xian and Bidding, who were still fighting fiercely in the distance. The next moment, the dragon cry sword in his hand suddenly turned into a sword light and slashed out. There was the roar of a dragon's soul in the sword light. In the distance, Yi Xian suddenly turned his head and was about to block with his sword. How would Bidding give Yi Xian the chance to do so? In an instant, Bidding shot more than a dozen arrows. These arrows were as fast as lightning and arrived in front of Yi Xian in the blink of an eye. If Yi Xian blocked that sword, he would definitely be hit by the arrow. However, Yi Xian did not block the dragon's cry sword. He turned around and fiercely swung his sword. In an instant, all the other arrows were blocked. At this time, the dragon's cry sword had already arrived behind Yi Xian. At this time, it was already too late for Yi Xian to defend. The dragon's cry sword easily pierced into Yi Xian's back. Seeing this, the people in the distance immediately relaxed a little. He had to admit that Yi Xian was indeed difficult to deal with. If this continued, he would definitely lose. Because he couldn't outlast Yi Xian. Yi Xian was constantly getting stronger. When the dragon's cry sword stabbed into Yi Xian's back, Feng Daoxiu didn't stop because he still had another move. At practically the exact same moment, 10 divine swords shot into the sky from within the swordsman on his back. In the next moment, they shot through space and instantly arrived around Yi Xian. After that, they entered Yi Xian's body at practically the exact same moment as the dragon's cry sword. 11 sword strikes. From the moment he attacked until the end, his movements were completed in one smooth motion, and it wasn't flashy at all. At this moment, the surroundings suddenly fell silent. The rock that was hanging in Bai Dizzy's heart had finally been lifted. The vigilance in Bidding's eyes had vanished completely at this moment. Meanwhile, Feng Daoxiu suddenly shook his head. How boring! Right at this moment, Bai Dizzy seemed to have thought of something, and his pupils constricted. Watch out! At practically the exact same moment, Yi Xian suddenly vanished on the spot, and it only took a moment for him to arrive in front of Bidding. Bidding's expression changed drastically when he witnessed this scene. What the hell? Bidding was caught off guard, and Bidding allowed Yi Xian to close in on him. How could a ranged attacker survive when an assassin closed in on him? Bidding didn't choose to retreat because it was too late now. He was just about to draw his bow when a sword suddenly stabbed into his chest. Bang! Bidding was instantly blasted over 1 kilometer away by the sword. Once Bidding stopped, he gazed at the sword in his chest. The soul suppression sword. Once it entered his body, his soul wouldn't even have a chance to escape. Bidding was slightly stunned, and he gazed at Yi Xian. At this moment, there were 11 swords stuck into Yi Xian's body, and there was even a sword stuck into his head. However, Yi Xian was fine. How could this be possible? At this moment, Feng Daoxiu was stunned as well. How could this be possible? Right at this moment, the swords on Yi Xian's body suddenly started to slowly disperse. He's absorbing them. Bidding stared fixedly at Yi Xian. He's absorbing the swords. Seeing his swords slowly disappear, Feng Daoxiu's face was filled with shock. How is this possible? In the distance, Bai Dizzy slowly closed his eyes. Regret. At this moment, Bai Dizzy was filled with regret. In fact, when he investigated Yi Xian previously, in Yi Xian's information, there was a mention of Yi Xian being able to absorb swords. However, he didn't take it seriously. This was because he thought that perhaps Yi Xian's constitution was a little special, and there was no powerful swordsman below, so Yi Xian could absorb swords. Therefore, he didn't take it seriously at all. However, he didn't expect that Yi Xian could even absorb swords of Dao validation state. After all, this Feng Daoxiu was not an ordinary swordsman. Even his swords could be absorbed? What kind of constitution was this? At this moment, Yi Xian had completely absorbed the 11 swords. Boom! An extremely powerful aura suddenly swept out from Yi Xian. At this moment, Yi Xian's aura multiplied. The aura was so powerful that the space around him cracked. This was a direct breakthrough in quality. In the distance, Wanbi was stunned. He looked at Feng Daoxiu not far away and asked, "Were you sent by the other side?" As soon as he finished speaking, his soul was completely absorbed. He died. After his death, he didn't even close his eyes. He died with everlasting regret. He wasn't killed by Yi Xian. He was killed by his own people. In the distance, Feng Daoxiu's expression was extremely ugly. His 11 swords had been absorbed. 11 swords. Even the divine dragon's soul had been absorbed by Yi Xian. What was this? Feng Daoxiu looked at Bai Di Xingjun. Bai Dizzy stared at Yi Xian in the distance. Retreat. Retreat? Feng Daoxiu's expression suddenly turned ferocious. He suddenly waved his hands. 10,000 swords to the origin. In an instant, tens of thousands of flying swords suddenly appeared in the sky. Feng Daoxiu pointed angrily at Yi Xian, who was still absorbing the swords, and roared, "Slash!" As soon as he spoke, tens of thousands of swords suddenly pierced through the sky. In an instant, tens of thousands of swords directly drowned Yi Xian. Feng Daoxiu stared into the distance. Soon, his expression changed. Yi Xian was absorbing the swords. Those tens of thousands of swords were directly absorbed by Yi Xian. At this moment, Yi Xian's aura suddenly skyrocketed. He became stronger again. Feng Daoxiu's face was extremely pale. His eyes were filled with disbelief. How is this possible? How is this possible? As if unwilling to give up, Feng Daoxiu was about to attack again. At this moment, Bai Dizzy suddenly roared angrily in the distance. "Stop it right now." Feng Daoxiu looked at Bai Dizzy. Bai Dizzy pointed into the distance. "Hurry up and get lost." Feng Daoxiu was speechless. Bai Dizzy suddenly roared angrily once more. "Do you want to die here?" Feng Daoxiu flew into a rage when he saw Bai Dizzy fly into a rage. "Don't talk nonsense. If you're so capable, why don't you attack?" Bai Dizzy glanced coldly at Feng Daoxiu. He did not say another word, and he retreated silently. On the other hand, Feng Daoxiu looked at Yi Xian in the distance with an extremely hideous expression. He opened his palm, and an energy sword appeared in his hand. In an instant, boundless spiritual energy in the heavens and the earth started to surge from this energy sword. Feng Daoxiu stared fixedly at Yi Xian. "I don't believe that you can absorb more." As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly took a step forward. As soon as he took that step, the energy sword in his hand suddenly flew out and slashed. A sword howl suddenly resounded through the sky. Under Feng Daoxiu's gaze, the energy sword slashed directly onto Yi Xian's body. Bang! Yi Xian's entire body shook, and then he shuddered. He seemed to be very comfortable. "I've been absorbed again." At this moment, Feng Daoxiu's face was ashen. How is this possible?" As he spoke, he charged directly at Yi Xian. In the next moment, numerous flying swords slashed towards Yi Xian. Every time Feng Daoxiu swung his sword, Yi Xian's aura would grow slightly stronger. At this moment, Feng Daoxiu had gone mad, and he attacked madly at Yi Xian. Around 15 minutes later, Yi Xian suddenly vanished on the spot. Feng Daoxiu's expression changed drastically. He was just about to attack when a sword had already pierced through the space between his brows. Blood sprayed. Yi Xian appeared behind Feng Daoxiu, and then he clenched his right hand. The soul-suppressing sword flew out from Feng Daoxiu's body and descended firmly into his grasp. Feng Daoxiu's soul had been destroyed. After Yi Xian killed Feng Daoxiu with a single strike, he walked towards the firmament hall. There were 2 portraits on both sides of the firmament hall's door. The gatekeepers. Yi Xian had just arrived before the door when the 2 portraits suddenly opened their eyes. In the next moment, 2 rays of golden light slashed directly at Yi Xian. Yi Xian swung his sword horizontally from below. The 2 rays of golden light shattered, and in the next moment, Yi Xian vanished on the spot. The heads of those 2 divine generals flew into the air. At the instant their heads hit the ground, Yi Xian had already entered the firmament hall. The hall was resplendent and extremely luxurious. After Yi Xian entered the hall, he glanced at the surroundings, and then he suddenly slashed with his sword. A strand of sword light suddenly erupted from within the firmament hall. In an instant, the entire firmament hall shattered into pieces. Yi Xian had left the firmament hall, but he hadn't left. Instead, he had slaughtered madly throughout the doubting hall. He had slaughtered from the south to the north, and from the north to the south. The entire doubting's 36 heavenly palaces and 72 palaces had been visited by him. For a time, the entire doubting hall was filled with wailing victims. About an hour later, Yi Xian returned to the heavenly gate. He sat paralyzed on the ground because there was no one left for him to kill. At this moment, Bai Dizzy suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. Yi Xian suddenly raised his head to look at Bai Dizzy. He picked up his sword and was about to attack. At this moment, Bai Dizzy suddenly said, "It was you who caused the death of the fifth dimension Tendo." There was a mysterious power in his voice, and this power directly penetrated deep into Yi Xian's body. At this moment, Yi Xian, who had lost his mind, suddenly stopped. Bai Dizzy stared at Yi Xian and said, "It was you who caused her death. If it wasn't for you, she wouldn't have died. She is already dead, so what right do you have to live in this world?" At this moment, 2 streams of bloody tears slowly flowed out from Yi Xian's eyes. Bai Dizzy continued, "She could have lived well, but it was because of you that she came to doubting and used the last of her strength to fight to the death with us, the doubting Dao ancestor. If it wasn't for you, how could she have died with her strength? It was you, Yi Xian, who caused her death." Killing heart. In the distance, Yi Xian's body suddenly began to tremble. He suddenly muttered, "It was who caused sister's death?" Bai Dizzy suddenly roared in anger, "It was you." His voice was like a great bell, shaking the heavens. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly held the sword across his throat. He looked at the horizon as if he had lost his soul. "It was me. I deserve to die." As his voice fell, he suddenly swiped. A stream of blood splattered out. Yi Xian slowly fell down. His left hand stretched out into the distance. In the horizon, he saw a woman smiling at him. In the woman's hand, there was a fish, but there was nothing in the horizon. Yi Xian suddenly grinned, sister? In the next life, I will roast fish for you for a lifetime. P.S. Do you dare to vote?" Chapter 1344. Seeing the scene of Yi Xian lying down, Bai Dizzy, who was far away, suddenly laughed. He laughed very happily. A very steady god was now laughing like a child who had received a gift. Actually, he just wanted to give it a try. The battle in the 2 worlds abyss was in a stalemate. There was no one there, and the doubting had to deal with the tomb of Dao. Because if the doubting retreated, the 2 worlds abyss would fall into the tomb of Dao. At that time, the situation would be extremely disadvantageous for the doubting. Therefore, Divine Lord True Marshal could not send the White Robe General and some other Divine Lords back. There was no other way. Therefore, he chose to use the words of death to deal with Yi Xian. He knew that the reason why Yi Xian slaughtered the doubting powerhouses so crazily was because of Mu Nian guilt. At that moment, Yi Xian must be feeling extremely guilty. Therefore, Bai Dizzy wanted to try to arouse the guilt in Yi Xian's heart, and he succeeded. Yi Xian actually killed himself in front of him. This was really delightful. However, soon, the smile on Bai Dizzy's face froze. In the distance, a monstrous killing intent suddenly swept out from Yi Xian's body. This killing intent swept across the sky like a storm, then spread towards the entire doubting. In an instant, the entire doubting was shrouded by a killing intent. Bai Dizzy's face was full of disbelief. This is... At that moment, Yi Xian, who had been lying on the ground in the distance, suddenly stood up slowly. Not dead? Bai Dizzy stared at Yi Xian. This... At that moment, Yi Xian suddenly pointed his sword at the sky. Boom! A sword condensed from killing intent suddenly shot into the sky. In an instant, the entire space above the doubting was shattered by that sword. After all, The space in the Dao court was extremely sturdy. Previously, Yi Xian's parting battle had not been able to shatter the surrounding space, but now, Yi Xian's sword had shattered the space so easily. As if he had thought of something, Bai Dizzy's face suddenly turned pale. Proving the way. Proving the way by killing. His voice was trembling. Killing to prove one's Dao. Killing intent rose, slaughtering the world. But what was the limit of killing intent? The ultimate killing intent was to kill oneself. A person who even wanted to kill himself, his killing intent was the most terrifying and extreme. At this moment, Bai Dizzy suddenly roared, "Impossible!" From ancient times until now, all those who killed to prove their Dao had perished. You can't be alive. There were indeed people in history who used killing to prove their Dao. Killing oneself could indeed prove one's Dao, but since ancient times, it was only proven before one died. In the history of doubting, there was one person who used killing to prove his Dao, and that person perished after proving his Dao. Proving one's Dao by killing was not something that could be achieved by pretending. It was a person who really wanted to kill himself. Without the real intention to commit suicide, it was impossible to prove one's Dao. Therefore, from ancient times until now, those who used killing to prove their Dao all perished at the same time. But now, Yi Xian was actually still alive. How was this possible? Soon, Bai Dizzy discovered the problem. He stared at Yi Xian, or more accurately, at the sword in Yi Xian's hand. This guy could absorb swords. It was impossible to kill him with swords. Moreover, he could not kill himself with swords. With his current sword Dao cultivation base and strength, only Mu Niannian could kill him with swords. An expert of that level. At this moment, Bai Dizzy suddenly slapped his face. "This dog mouth of mine." His old face instantly turned red and swollen. As if he felt that it was not enough, Bai Dizzy slapped his old face a few more times. Let Yi Xian commit suicide? At this moment, Bai Dizzy wanted to die. Damn it, what kind of stupid move did I make? I'm simply an idiot. Bai Dizzy was filled with regret. Yi Xian was only at self-release realm previously, but he could already kill Dao controlling realm experts. Now Yi Xian reached Dao validation realm, and he used killing to prove his Dao. Using killing to prove his Dao. This method of proving one's Dao was extremely domineering and terrifying. It could be said that using the sword to prove one's Dao wasn't as terrifying as using killing to prove one's Dao. Once the intent to kill arose, who could resist it? The current Yi Xian, not to mention Dao controlling realm experts, even ordinary divine lords in doubting were probably no match for him. The current Yi Xian was a great threat. Bai Dizzy took a deep look at Yi Xian, then left silently. In the distance, Yi Xian's eyes were closed tightly, and the killing intent around him was almost tangible. Killing domain. The fourth type of domain. Using killing to prove one's Dao, using killing to form a domain. At this moment, Yi Xian reached Dao validation realm without the help of a god seal. Not only that, but he also used killing to form a domain. In fact, he could directly use killing to prove one's Dao, not only because of his killing intent, but also because he had devoured those swords. 11 swords, that wasn't just any ordinary nourishment. Especially when that Feng Daoxiu even frantically increased his energy, before he used killing to prove one's Dao, his own strength had actually already reached a limit. At the moment when he committed suicide, killing intent arose, and coupled with the strength from before, he used killing to prove one's Dao. Now was the moment when he was at his peak. In the battlefield, Yi Xian released the killing intent in his body in a frenzy. His killing intent swept towards the surroundings, and at this moment, Daoting was enveloped by his killing intent. However, Yi Xian did not notice that the sword in his hand was also becoming stronger. The sword spirit. The sword that used to belong to the green-robed man. The strength of the 3 swords didn't lie in the sword, but in the person. The stronger the person, the stronger the sword. However, the sword spirit was different. Not only did it not have a cultivation, but it had once followed its former master and used killing to prove one's Dao. Although Yi Xian could not fully unleash its power, after using killing to prove one's Dao, Yi Xian could unleash at least 50% of its strength. The stronger the killing intent, the stronger the sword. Coupled with his blood domain and the power of his bloodline, his Tao of killing would be unprecedentedly powerful. Around 15 minutes later, Yi Xian slowly calmed down, but he still had not returned to normal. Yi Xian walked away with the sword in hand. Continue killing. Just like before, there was only one thought in his mind, and that was to kill. Kill everyone in doubting. Leave no one alive. Yi Xian killed from the south to the north, then from the south to the west. In doubting, he killed every living thing he saw. The entire doubting was filled with corpses. Just as Yi Xian walked out of a palace with the sword in hand, a middle-aged man suddenly appeared in front of him. Yi Xian's killing intent disappeared without a trace when it was half a foot in front of the middle-aged man. The powerful killing intent could not even get close to the middle-aged man. The middle-aged man in front of him was the Tao ancestor who had gone into seclusion to heal his injuries. Beside the Tao ancestor was Bai Dizzy. The Tao ancestor looked at Yi Xian in the distance. View. Brother and sister, each more demonic than the other. In fact, he had been doubting all along, but he did not come out earlier because the most important thing to him was to heal his injuries. Moon Yanyan had seriously injured him and destroyed his body, which was very fatal to him. This was because doubting had a mortal enemy, the Dao Tomb. Fortunately, the one in the Dao Tomb was in seclusion, or doubting would be in danger. Therefore, he had to rebuild his body before the one in doubting went into seclusion, so that he could recover to his peak condition. But now, he had no choice but to come out. Yi Xian had proven his Dao by killing. If it was just a normal Dao proving, he would not come out because Yi Xian could not threaten doubting. However, proving his Dao by killing was different. Great killing intent. Why would he have such a great killing intent? Because Yi Xian wanted to destroy doubting. How much killing intent and hatred did he have to prove his Dao? The Tao ancestor knew that he had to come out and kill Yi Xian. The current Yi Xian was no longer a threat to the Dao Tomb. If he was allowed to grow, Yi Xian would become the Dao Tomb's greatest enemy in the future. This was his intuition. The Tao ancestor looked at Yi Xian and slowly raised his right hand. It's over. As soon as he finished speaking, a powerful force suddenly appeared around him. As soon as this force appeared, the killing intent in the surroundings slowly dissipated. Bai Dizzy retreated to the side and looked at Yi Xian. This time, this guy should die, right? Although Yi Xian's current strength was unprecedentedly strong, the person in front of Yi Xian was the Tao ancestor, one of the strongest in the world. Yi Xian seemed to have sensed danger from afar. He held the sword spirit tightly in his right hand, and a powerful force swept out from within him. After a moment of silence, Yi Xian suddenly leaped up and slashed down with his sword. A single slash could destroy the world. This slash tore the space in the surroundings apart. At this moment, the Tao ancestor suddenly threw a punch. It was a very ordinary punch, and there was not even the slightest energy fluctuation. However, in the instant that he threw that punch, the sword momentum of Yi Xian's sword instantly disappeared. At the same time, Yi Xian's entire body was sent flying. This time, he flew from the south gate to the north gate. As soon as Yi Xian landed on the ground, the space behind him turned into nothingness, and he spat out a few mouthfuls of blood essence. In front of the south gate, the Tao ancestor took a step forward. With one step, he came directly in front of Yi Xian. The Tao ancestor gazed at Yi Xian with an expressionless face. If your sister was here, then I would show her some respect. Unfortunately, she isn't here. But I won't give you any time or chance. As soon as he finished speaking, he smashed his fist forward once more. Yi Xian suddenly raised his head, roared furiously, and slashed down with his sword. 4 types of domains. Bang! As soon as his sword descended, the space here suddenly exploded apart, and Yi Xian retreated 30 kilometers. However, the Tao ancestor retreated a few meters as well. Bai Dizzy's expression became extremely solemn when he witnessed this scene. He'd repelled the Tao ancestor with a single strike of his sword. Bai Dizzy clenched his fists tightly. If Yi Xian doesn't die, then he'll definitely become a great calamity for the doubting in the future. The Tao ancestor's eyes were filled with killing intent as well, and he stared at Yi Xian, who was 30 kilometers away, I really can't let you live." As soon as he finished speaking, he'd appeared in front of Yi Xian, and then he smashed his fist forward once more. Meanwhile, a woman suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian, and she smashed her fist forward as well. Bang! The force of the Tao ancestor's fist was instantly destroyed. At the same time, the Tao ancestor was blasted over 1 kilometer away. The Tao ancestor stared fixedly at the woman in the distance. Chapter 1345. The woman who had just appeared was none other than Yi Ling. Of course, Yi Ling wasn't the one who was in control of the body. After she repelled the Tao ancestor with a single punch, Yi Ling turned to look at Yi Xian. Yi Xian's mind was still abnormal. Yi Ling fell silent for a moment before she suddenly pressed her right hand against Yi Xian's shoulder. In an instant, Yi Xian's killing intent was suppressed within Yi Xian's body, and then she left with Yi Xian. Suddenly, the Tao ancestor said, "Are you leaving just like that?" Yi Ling suddenly turned around and punched. A ray of dim light flashed across the battlefield. The Tao ancestor's eyes narrowed slightly as he punched forward. Bang! The space there trembled violently, and then the Tao ancestor retreated 3 kilometers away. After he stopped, the Tao ancestor's expression became unprecedentedly solemn. In the distance, Yi Ling didn't attack again. Instead, she left with Yi Xian. The Tao ancestor didn't dare attack again. The Tao ancestor stared fixedly at Yi Xian and Yi Ling, who'd vanished into the distance, and then he said, "Investigate." Bai Dizzy nodded and left silently. The Tao ancestor slowly closed his eyes. Yi Xian. At this moment he was both shocked and furious. The 5th dimension Tendo was gone. However, another mysterious expert had appeared behind Yi Xian. What exactly is the power behind Yi Xian? The Tao ancestor remained silent for a long time before he turned around and left. He had to reconstruct his body as soon as possible. Yi Ling brought Yi Xian back to the 5th dimension. Yi Ling stood in the starry sky and looked at Moon Yanyan's main body in the distance. No one knew what she was thinking. Behind Yi Ling was Yi Xian. At this moment, Yi Xian was gradually returning to normal. However, his white hair had not returned to normal. Yi Xian slowly stood up. He looked at Yi Ling and said in a trembling voice, "Ling?" Yi Ling turned around and looked at Yi Xian. "Did you enjoy killing them?" Yi Xian said in a deep voice, "Ling, why did you come back at this time?" Yi Ling turned to look at Moon Yanyan's true form in the distance and said softly, "A few days ago, she found me." "Sister Nyan." Yi Xian looked at Moon Yanyan's body in the distance and slowly clenched his fists. Yi Ling turned to look at Yi Xian. "She said that her path has come to an end. However, she was worried about you. She said that after she left, you might do something stupid, so she hoped that I would come back to help. She was right, you will indeed do something stupid." Yi Xian lowered his head slightly and remained silent. Yi Ling walked in front of Yi Xian. "Raise your head and look at me." Yi Xian looked at Yi Ling. At some point, his cheeks were covered in tears. Yi Ling looked straight at Yi Xian. "It's not that you can't die, but if you die like that, will you be able to face her, who died for you?" Yi Xian was silent. Yi Ling continued, "She gave up everything for this universe. Now, look at this universe. What kind of situation is this universe in now?" Yi Xian turned around and looked. At this time, the 5th dimension was already fragmenting. Fortunately, Moon Yanyan's power still existed. She did not use the remaining 70% of her power until her death. It was also because of the 70% of her power that the entire 5th dimension was not fragmented. However, the situation was still not good. Although the 5th dimension's 5th dimension calamity had not completely erupted, it had already descended. All kinds of natural and man-made disasters were unceasing. In short, the current 5th dimension was very chaotic. As if thinking of something, Yi Xian suddenly shook his head and said with a trembling voice, "Sister Nyan, you are really stupid." Yi Ling suddenly said, "She is not stupid. This was her choice. She chose you, chose the 5th dimension." Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes. "Sister Nyan, don't worry, I will govern the 5th dimension well." As he said this, he looked at Yi Ling. After coming back, will you still leave? Yi Ling nodded. Yi Xian was about to speak when Yi Ling said, "Give me the coffin in your body." Yi Xian was stunned. Then he took out the ice coffin. Looking at the ice coffin in front of him, Yi Ling's eyes flashed with a trace of complexity. Yi Xian asked, "Do you know who is inside?" Yi Ling nodded. She put away the coffin and looked at Yi Xian. "Lend me your sister's body for a period of time. Don't worry, I will not harm her. On the contrary, she will follow me and receive all my inheritance. I will also teach her with all my heart." Yi Xian quickly cupped his fists. "Many thanks." Yi Ling turned her head and looked at Moon Yanyan's body. Then she said, "I am leaving." After saying this, she was about to leave. At this time, Yi Xian suddenly asked, "Can you kill that Dao ancestor?" Yi Ling looked at Yi Xian. "I can. However, your sister's body cannot withstand too much of my power." Yi Xian was silent. Yi Ling pointed at Moon Yanyan's body in the distance. Then she said, "You will take revenge for her yourself." After saying this, she turned around and disappeared at the end of the Milky Way. In the same place, Yi Xian was silent. At this time, a woman suddenly appeared beside Yi Xian. Yi Jiming. Yi Jiming looked at Yi Xian without saying a word. In fact, she was also here to scold Yi Xian. This was because she knew that Yi Xian had gone to the doubting. However, when she saw Yi Xian, she couldn't bring herself to scold him. Regarding Moon Yanyan's death, Yi Xian was the one who suffered the most. At this time, Yi Xian suddenly turned around and looked at Yi Jiming. "What is the current situation in the fifth dimension?" Yi Jiming looked at Yi Xian. "They are all waiting for you." Yi Xian nodded. "Let's return." After saying this, he left with Yi Jiming. After Yi Xian and Yi Jiming left, Yi Ling appeared again. She looked at Moon Yanyan, who was lying quietly in the distance, and said softly, "You were born because of the fifth dimension, and now you will die because of the fifth dimension." After saying this, she looked at the fifth dimension below her. "Little guy, you have to cure the fifth dimension. Otherwise, you will regret it for the rest of your life." After saying this, she looked at Moon Yanyan, who was lying in the starry sky. "Miss, we will meet again." After saying this, she disappeared. In the starry sky, Moon Yanyan was lying quietly. When they saw that Yi Xian had returned safely, Guan Yin and the rest heaved a sigh of relief. When they found out that Yi Xian had gone to the doubting, they were shocked. That was doubting. But fortunately, Yi Xian had returned. In a large hall, all the self-release realm experts of the entire fifth dimension were gathered. Everyone was looking at Yi Xian. Yi Xian suddenly looked at Jiang Yu. "Pavilion Master Jiang, bring all the experts of the Dao world to the various parts of the world. Your mission is very simple: save the dying and help the injured. As for some natural disasters, if you can stop them, then stop them. If you can't, then save the people and living beings." Jiang Yu nodded. "I will do it now." After saying this, he turned and left. Yi Xian looked at Guan Yin. Now that the fifth dimension has arrived, everyone in the world must be panicking. At this time, there will be people who will take advantage of the situation to create chaos. Send a team of experts to patrol the world. Anyone who takes advantage of the situation to create chaos will be killed. Guan Yin nodded. But Yi Xian looked at Wenjiarua. "Miss Wen, the fifth dimension needs the help of the sixth dimension." Wenjiarua hurriedly said, "Young Master Yi, please speak." Ever since Yi Xian was willing to share the Dao scripture, the sixth dimension had already followed Yi Xian's lead. The Dao scripture. It could change the fate of all the experts in the sixth dimension. Yi Xian said in a deep voice, "Right now, the fifth dimension definitely doesn't have enough manpower. I hope that the sixth dimension will send people down to help. Also, the spiritual energy of the fifth dimension is collapsing. We need some heaven and earth spirit and spirit veins. Miss Wen, don't worry. I will only borrow them temporarily. After the fifth dimension stabilizes, I will return them all. As for the problem of the spiritual energy of the fifth dimension, I will think of a way to solve it." Wenjiarua hesitated before nodding. "But I will do it now." After saying this, she got up and left. Yi Xian looked at the abbot of the ancient temple. The current abbot of the ancient temple was also the leader of the realm of ultimate bliss. Seeing that Yi Xian was looking at him, the abbot immediately got up and put his palms together. Half a day ago, I summoned all the monks of the realm of ultimate bliss to the 5th dimension. There are also some spirit veins and heaven and earth spirit of the realm of ultimate bliss. Now, they are all waiting outside for young Master Ye's orders. Yi Xian nodded slightly. Thank you. The abbot of the ancient temple hurriedly said, It's my duty. Yi Xian nodded. He glanced at the crowd and said, Everyone, now that the 5th dimension's calamity has arrived, the 5th dimension is facing unprecedented difficulties. In this critical period, I need everyone's help. Therefore, I hope that during this period, everyone can put away those thoughts in your hearts. Think what you should think, but don't think about what you shouldn't think, and don't do it. Once this crisis is over, I, Yi Xian, will not treat everyone unfairly. He knew that the reason the various powers of the 5th dimension were united was because of the Tao scripture, as well as because they had a common enemy. But now, the 5th dimension's calamity had appeared, but it was suppressed by Moon Yanyan's power. Everyone no longer felt a sense of crisis, and at this time, many people were starting to calculate some thoughts in their hearts. Hearing Yi Xian's words, the expressions of many people became somewhat unnatural. At this time, Yi Xian said, Everyone has reached release 1. Some are true release 1, some are not. What I want to say is that everyone should set their sights further. After saying this, his right hand lightly pressed forward. In an instant, an invisible pressure suddenly enveloped everyone present. At this moment, the expressions of everyone present changed. Even at Jiu, Situ, and Arrow. Tao Validation Realm. True Tao Validation Realm. Yi Xian looked at everyone. I don't want to intimidate everyone, I just want to tell everyone that if I, Yi Xian, can reach true Tao Validation Realm, everyone can as well. Of course, the premise is that everyone is an expert of my 5th dimension. Do you understand what I mean? At this time, an old man suddenly said with a trembling voice, I understand, I understand. This old man is a person of the 5th dimension, and when I die, I will be a ghost of the 5th dimension. If anyone dares to harm the 5th dimension, this old man will be the first to not let them off. Countless people hurriedly expressed their opinions. Yi Xian looked at everyone present. He was very clear that the 5th dimension was very big, and it was not something that he, Yi Xian, could manage alone. He needed the help of these people, but after these people cultivated to release 1, they would not care about the lives of others in this universe. In their hearts, their goal was to prove their Tao, to control their Tao benefits. He needed to use benefits to bind these people together, and then make them change the 5th dimension with him. As long as there were enough benefits, even a bad person could become a good person. And now, Yi Xian's goal in life was to protect the 5th dimension and let it exist for generations to come. Inside the hall, everyone was very excited. Yi Xian had reached Tao Validation Realm. What did this mean? It meant that these people also had a chance to reach Tao Validation Realm. As for Yi Xian, they still had a lot of trust in him, because when Yi Xian said he would share the Tao scripture, he would really share it. Yi Xian walked to the entrance of the hall, looked up at the end of the starry sky, and softly said, Sister Nian, I really want to talk to you. Most of the time, the most regretful thing in life was not separation, but not being able to properly say goodbye. P.S. Asking for votes. Chapter 1346. In the following period of time, Yi Xian began to personally deal with the matters of the 5-dimensional universe. Suppress the 5-dimensional calamity. Although the 5-dimensional calamity had yet to erupt, the current situation of the 5-dimensional universe was still not good. The various heavenly tribulations were secondary, because the current experts in the 5th dimension were enough to suppress these heavenly tribulations and various natural disasters. As for man-made disasters, the 5th dimension alliance that Yi Xian established also had the ability to suppress man-made disasters within the 5th dimension. However, the collapse of spiritual qi was the biggest problem. This was also a problem that Moon Yanyan had not been able to solve. Although Yi Xian had borrowed spirit veins and all kinds of world spirits from the six-dimensional universe and the Dao world, compared to the collapse of spiritual qi in the five-dimensional universe, it was really a drop in the bucket. If this continued, even if the five-dimensional universe survived, the spiritual qi would completely collapse and the five-dimensional universe would become a dead planet. In the clouds, Yi Xian looked down at the world below. At this moment, he finally understood to what extent the five-dimensional universe was in a serious situation. What should he do? As if he had thought of something, Yi Xian suddenly took out the box he had obtained from the sword sect. Could this little fellow save the five-dimensional universe? There was no other way. Yi Xian opened the box. Boom! A wave of pure spiritual qi suddenly rushed out of the box. Soon, a small white claw stretched out of the box, followed by a small head. The familiar face. After the white little fellow crawled out, she blinked her eyes and then looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian quickly took out a stick of candied hawthorn and handed it to the white little fellow. Seeing the candied hawthorn, the white little fellow's eyes lit up. She took the candied hawthorn and licked it, then grinned at Yi Xian. At this time, Xiao Linger also appeared beside Yi Xian. Xiao Linger looked at the white little fellow and was very happy. She picked up the white little fellow and quickly said something. The white little fellow was also very friendly towards Xiao Linger. She even plucked a candied hawthorn and gave it to Xiao Linger. At this time, Yi Xian suddenly said, "Can you do me a favor?" The little white fellow looked at Yi Xian, and Yi Xian said softly, "Look at this world's spiritual qi. Can you help me recover?" The little white guy looked around and shook his head. Yi Xian slowly clenched his fists. "Why?" The little white fellow gently waved its little paw and the spiritual energy within a radius of tens of thousands of miles suddenly became dense. However, the spiritual energy soon began to dissipate at an extremely fast rate. Yi Xian understood. If he wanted to restore the spiritual qi of this cosmos, he had to first resolve the fifth-dimensional tribulation of the fifth dimension. Otherwise, with the tribulation present, the spiritual qi would never be able to recover. This was because the heavenly tribulation and various natural disasters would continuously damage the spiritual qi and origin of the fifth dimension. With this in mind, Yi Xian looked at Xiao Linger and said, "You play with her." With that, he turned around and left. In the following period of time, Yi Xian began to lead the experts of the fifth dimension to suppress all kinds of natural disasters. If they could not be suppressed, they would be sealed. For example, the volcanoes at the bottom of the sea had the strongest destructive power. If they could not be suppressed, then they would be directly erased. He currently had the strength to do so. Under the concerted efforts of the fifth dimension, the sixth dimension, and the Dao world, the natural disasters in the fifth dimension became fewer and fewer. However, during this process, Yi Xian was also shocked. This was because he discovered that if it were not for Moon Yanyan's power suppressing them, they would not be able to resist the fifth dimension tribulation. Even Yi Xian would be helpless. The entire fifth dimension. How many volcanoes were there in the entire fifth dimension? How many sea regions? And the underground magma. If it were not for Moon Yanyan's power suppressing them, who could stop them if they erupted? It was simply impossible to stop them. They could only escape. However, Moon Yanyan had used her power to suppress the entire fifth dimension. In other words, she had used her power to protect the fifth dimension. At this moment, he thought of something that Moon Yanyan had once said: as long as she did not want to die, it would be very difficult for her to die. In addition, he also discovered that the situation in the fifth dimension was more serious than he had imagined. The spiritual qi in all parts of the world was disappearing, and this disappearing spiritual qi would disappear forever. Spiritual qi was a very serious problem that the fifth dimension would face in the future. In the starry sky, Yi Xian found Ling, who had always been by Moon Yanyan's side. Ling-Er's original name was Origin Spirit, and she was the spirit of the fifth dimension's origin. Her current situation was very bad because the fifth dimension tribulation had arrived, and she, the spirit of the origin, was the one who had suffered the most. Origin Spirit had always been by Moon Yanyan's side and had never left. Yi Xian did not come alone. Instead, he had brought along the little white fellow and Xiaoling. Yi Xian brought the little white fellow to the front of Origin Spirit. Origin Spirit looked at the little white fellow with excitement and nervousness. Yi Xian suddenly looked at the little white fellow. Can you help her? The little white fellow blinked and then nodded. She floated in front of Origin Spirit and pressed her right claw down on Origin Spirit. In an instant, endless purple gas enveloped Origin Spirit. Boom! A powerful aura suddenly swept out from Origin Spirit's body, causing the starry sky to tremble. After a moment, the little white fellow retracted her little claw. Origin Spirit opened her eyes and looked at the little white fellow. She said softly, "Thank you." The little white fellow grinned. Yi Xian hurriedly asked, "Have you broken through?" Origin Spirit glanced at Yi Xian and nodded. She seemed to have thought of something and turned to look at Mu Nianyan's body in the distance. She said softly, "So, this is the opportunity she was talking about." In the past, Mu Nianyan had asked her to follow Yi Xian and said that there would be an opportunity in the future. Obviously, this fortuitous encounter was the little white fellow. Yi Xian looked at Origin Spirit. "I need your help." Origin Spirit was the source of the five-dimensional universe. If he had her help, it would be much easier for him to restore the five-dimensional universe's spiritual qi. After a moment of silence, Origin Spirit said, "She has no way to completely restore the five-dimensional universe's spiritual qi. This is because this is not her main body. It is just a small clone that she left behind." Yi Xian glanced at the little white fellow. This little fellow was indeed just a clone. No, it was not even a clone. It could only be considered a small wisp of spiritual qi. Yi Xian suddenly said, "Can we steal spiritual qi from other places?" Origin Spirit looked at Yi Xian, and Yi Xian said softly, "This should be possible, right?" Origin Spirit said in a deep voice, "In theory, this is possible. However, do you want to attack the six-dimensional universe and the Dao world?" Yi Xian shook his head. "I am not that wicked." He definitely could not attack the six-dimensional universe and the Dao world. Origin Spirit said again, "There is another question. How can we steal spiritual qi?" At this time, the little white fellow suddenly pointed at herself and waved her little claws quickly. She seemed very excited. Xiaoling, quickly translated, "She said she can." Yi Xian was speechless. Origin Spirit's expression was a little strange. Why did this little fellow have the aura of a bandit? Yi Xian suddenly looked at the little white fellow. "Then let's go." The little white fellow nodded quickly. Yi Xian left with the little white fellow. Behind him, Origin Spirit looked at Yi Xian with a complicated expression. Doubting. At this time, the doubting was shrouded in a shadow. Yi Xian had killed most of the doubting, which was really a great shame for the entire doubting. In a dilapidated hall, the White Emperor's son sat quietly. Now, all the affairs of the doubting were under his control. He was basically in charge of the internal affairs of the doubting, while true martial divine lord was in charge of the external affairs. One of them was in charge of the external affairs, while the other was in charge of the internal affairs. However, now that true martial divine lord was fighting against the Dao tomb in the celestial realm abyss, he could only manage the affairs of Yi Xian and the five-dimensional universe. In the hall, besides Bai Dizzy, there were also some doubting experts. They were all people who had luckily escaped from Yi Xian's butcher knife. Bai Dizzy suddenly looked at a heaven general below. Yi Xian and the experts of the five-dimensional universe are suppressing the calamity of the five-dimensional universe? The heaven general nodded. Yes. Not only that, but he also borrowed spirit veins and spirit qi from the six-dimensional universe and the Dao world. However, it's not very useful. Bai Dizzy chuckled. The fifth dimension calamity destroyed the origin of the five-dimensional universe. How can the spirit qi recover before the calamity is over? Moreover, even if the fifth dimension calamity is completely suppressed, the spirit qi that disappeared can't come back. At this time, if they want to save the five-dimensional universe, there is only one way, and that is to get spirit qi from other places. At this point, his smile gradually widened. Do you think he got spirit qi from the six-dimensional universe or the Dao world? These two are Yi Xian's allies. Below, the Heaven General suddenly said, "Will he target our doubting?" Bai Dizzy shook his head. "Absolutely impossible. Because he doesn't have that ability. My doubting is very far from the five-dimensional universe, so it's impossible for him to get spirit chi from us. Even if we give him spirit chi, he won't be able to move my doubting spirit chi to the five-dimensional universe. His best method is to break the barrier between the six-dimensional universe and the five-dimensional universe, allowing the two universes to flow, allowing the spirit chi of the six-dimensional universe to enter the five-dimensional universe. However, if he does that, the six-dimensional universe will be out of luck. Moreover, even if he does that, he won't be able to save the five-dimensional universe. Right now, the spirit chi of the five-dimensional universe has collapsed, so even a little bit of spirit chi is useless." At this point he shook his head and smiled. "The spirit chi I doubting spirit chi is enough. Moreover, it's pure and can supplement the five-dimensional universe. However, Yi Xian doesn't seem to have the ability to move my doubting spirit chi to the five-dimensional universe." Just as he finished speaking, a Heaven General suddenly rushed into the hall. That Heaven General said with a trembling voice, "Yi Xian. He's here again." Yi Xian had come. Hearing this, the expressions of everyone in the hall changed drastically. Bai Dizzy suddenly disappeared from where he stood. As soon as Yi Xian appeared in front of the south gate, Bai Dizzy appeared in front of him. Bai Dizzy stared at Yi Xian. At this time, Yi Xian was in a normal state and hadn't gone crazy. Bai Dizzy's heart relaxed slightly. As long as he was rational, then he could talk. There would be flaws. He was afraid of a crazy Yi Xian who only wanted to kill people and didn't care about anything else. The current doubting really didn't want to face a crazy Yi Xian, at least before the battle of the two-world abyss ended. Bai Dizzy looked at Yi Xian. "Yi Xian, do you want to kill people again?" Yi Xian shook his head. "I'm here to borrow something from doubting." For him, there were only two things in his future life. Take good care of the five-dimensional universe and destroy doubting. As for killing people, killing a few doubting minions was meaningless. His goal, Yi Xian, was to destroy the entire doubting. Bai Dizzy frowned. "Borrow something?" Yi Xian nodded. "The five-dimensional universe lacks spiritual energy. I'm borrowing some from doubting." Bai Dizzy was stunned. Then he smiled. "The spiritual energy here is pure. You can absorb it as much as you want?" Yi Xian looked at Bai Dizzy. "Really?" Bai Dizzy nodded and smiled. "Absorb as much as you can. Also, you don't need to borrow it. I'm giving it to you as a gift from doubting." Yi Xian said softly, "Then I won't stand on ceremony." Bai Dizzy smiled. "Don't stand on ceremony. Quickly absorb. Absorb as much as you can." There was an undisguised sarcasm in his voice. At this time, a little white guy suddenly appeared beside Yi Xian. Yi Xian looked at the little white guy. "Absorb." The little white guy grinned. She looked around and sniffed. In an instant. Fix. Chapter 1347. When that little white fellow appeared beside Yi Xian, Bai Dizzy's expression changed instantly, because a sense of unease arose in his heart. At this moment he suddenly calmed down. This Yi Xian did not seem to be a brainless person. Since he dared to come here, he must have something to rely on. And at this moment, as that little white fellow inhaled, the surrounding spiritual energy disappeared in an instant. Directly disappeared. Not only was the surrounding spiritual energy gone, but even the spiritual energy of the entire 33 levels of heaven also surged towards that little white fellow at this moment. This little white fellow was like a whirlpool at this moment. The entire doubting spiritual energy was gathering towards her. Seeing this scene, Bai Dizzy was stunned. Very quickly, Bai Dizzy reacted. He looked at Yi Xian and said angrily, "Stop now." Yi Xian spread out his hands. "You said it. Absorb as much as you want." Bai Dizzy's expression was as ugly as if he had eaten feces. He glared at Yi Xian. "I asked you to absorb, not her." Yi Xian shrugged. "Her absorbing is equivalent to me absorbing." Bai Dizzy stared at Yi Xian. Yi Xian suddenly asked, Has the battle of the dual realm abyss ended? Bai Dizzy looked at Yi Xian. If it ended, would you still be able to stand here? Yi Xian chuckled and looked at that little white fellow. Absorb more. The spiritual energy here is very pure. That little white fellow nodded hurriedly and continued to absorb. The entire doubting spiritual energy was disappearing at a speed visible to the naked eye. Bai Dizzy looked at that little white fellow. At this moment he was extremely shocked. This little fellow was actually able to absorb so much spiritual energy? The spiritual energy of the 33 levels of heaven was not an ordinary amount. But this little fellow actually absorbed all of it. Absorbed all of it. What kind of monster was this? At this moment, many doubting powerhouses suddenly appeared in the surroundings. But no one dared to make a move. They had experienced Yi Xian's strength before. When this fellow went berserk, he was simply inhuman. In the current doubting, apart from the Dao ancestor who was already in seclusion, no one could deal with Yi Xian. The White Emperor's son remained silent. He felt very helpless. He could only watch as Yi Xian absorbed the doubting spiritual qi. The battle in the two-world abyss was extremely dangerous. If the two-world abyss was lost, the doubting would forever be in a passive position. That would be a disaster for the doubting. Therefore, the doubting had mobilized almost all of their forces. It was also because of this that Yi Xian was able to act like a tyrant here. Soon, all the spiritual qi in the doubting was absorbed by the little white fellow. Yi Xian smiled and said, "Let's go." Hearing Yi Xian's words, Bai Dizzy heaved a sigh of relief. Although the spiritual qi being absorbed was a little harmful to the doubting, it was not serious because the doubting dragon veins were still there. There were 136 dragon veins in the doubting. They were the true core of the doubting spiritual qi. At this moment, the little white fellow shook its head. Not leaving? Yi Xian looked at the little white fellow. What's wrong? The little white fellow pointed its little paw into the distance and waved it quickly. Yi Xian shook his head. I don't understand. Can you speak like a human? The little white fellow was speechless. Yi Xian was about to speak when the little white fellow suddenly waved its little paw. In an instant, a wave of spiritual qi floated out. Seeing this, the White Emperor's son frowned. What are you doing? Yi Xian was also confused. Soon, the wave of spiritual qi disappeared. There was a moment of silence. Roar. Suddenly, a series of dragon roars resounded throughout the entire Dao court. Dragon veins. Seeing this, Bai Dizzy's expression changed drastically. He stared at the little white fellow. What are you doing? The little white fellow ignored Bai Dizzy. She looked at the horizon. Soon, huge white dragons appeared in the surroundings. At this moment, all the dragon veins in the doubting left their positions and came to the sky above the heavenly gate. 136 dragon veins appeared above the heavenly gate. It was a magnificent sight. Far away, Bai Dizzy suddenly roared. All dragon veins, return to your positions. The dragon veins glanced at Bai Dizzy. They seemed to be slightly fearful. At this moment, the little white fellow suddenly appeared in the sky. She looked at the white dragons and harumphed. The white dragons hurriedly lowered their heads. The spirit ancestor. The ancestor of all spirits in the world. Although it was only a wave of spiritual qi, it was not something that the dragon veins dared to resist. Seeing how docile the dragon veins were, Bai Dizzy's face instantly turned pale. At this moment, the little white fellow suddenly waved her little claw and turned to leave. The dragon veins hurriedly followed behind her. Yi Xian was stunned on the spot. He did not expect that the little fellow could steal someone's dragon veins. At this moment, Bai Dizzy suddenly roared. Stop them. He could let Yi Xian absorb spiritual qi, but he could not let the dragon veins leave with Yi Xian. Because the dragon veins were the core of the doubting spiritual qi. Once they left with Yi Xian, it would be a huge blow to the doubting. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly turned to look at the doubting experts. He had already unsheathed his sword. The expressions of the experts from the Dao Palace instantly changed when they witnessed this scene. Currently, besides the doubting experts, no one was a match for Yi Xian. Although the doubting experts had stopped, Yixian did not stop. He suddenly slashed with his sword with his right hand. Pissed! Tens of meters away, the heads of over 10 doubting experts flew. Seeing this, the doubting experts' expressions changed and they retreated. In the sky, Yixian looked at Bai Dizzy. Thank you for the doubting's gift. With that, he looked at the little white fellow. Let's go. The little white fellow hesitated for a moment, and then she took out a stick of candied fruit and tossed it to Bai Dizzy. Bai Dizzy looked at the little white fellow. What do you mean by that? The little white fellow blinked and pointed at the candied fruit. Then she pointed at the dragon veins in the sky. Bai Dizzy gulped. You exchanged that candied fruit with me for those dragon veins? The little white fellow nodded hurriedly. She waved her claws a few times with a pained expression. Bai Dizzy looked at the little white fellow. You're saying that you're making a loss? The little white fellow nodded. Bai Dizzy's face twitched. He stared at the little white fellow. His gaze could kill. In the sky, Yixian looked at Bai Dizzy. You can actually understand her beast language. You're really a talent. With that, he left with the little white fellow. In the sky, the little white fellow seemed to be unwilling to give up. From time to time, she would look back at the candied fruit in Bai Dizzy's hand. In front of the heavenly gate, Bai Dizzy looked at the candied fruit in his hand. His expression was extremely ugly. This candied fruit was exchanged for 136 dragon veins. However, the little white fellow actually felt that it was a loss. Was there any justice in this world? Was there any law? After a moment, Bai Dizzy suddenly turned and left. In the fifth dimension. After Yixian and the little white fellow returned to the fifth dimension, the little white fellow opened her mouth and spat. In an instant, the spiritual qi that she had absorbed from the doubtings surged out of her body. Soon, this spiritual qi began to spread throughout the fifth dimension. At the same time, the little white fellow released the 136 dragon veins. When these 136 dragon veins appeared in this world, the spiritual qi in this world recovered at a speed visible to the naked eye. The dragon veins were the core of the spiritual qi. Previously, there was not a single dragon vein in the fifth dimension, but now there were 136 of them. Even the sixth dimension and the Dao world were somewhat envious. Dragon veins. It could be said that among the spiritual veins, these dragon veins belonged to the top. With the little white fellow, the spiritual qi, and the spiritual qi, the fifth dimension was rapidly recovering. However, the heavenly tribulation and various natural disasters had not completely disappeared. The origin spirit had not completely recovered either. However, the problem was no longer big. This was because those natural disasters could be suppressed by humans. If it was in the past, even with the suppression of Mu Nianyan's power, countless people would have died in the fifth dimension. This was because the fifth dimension had never been so united before. The current fifth dimension was not only the most united in history, but it was also the most powerful in history. With so many people working together, the fifth dimension did not fall into chaos even though the natural disasters were unceasing. As for the origin spirit, for now, it was still a bit difficult for it to completely recover. However, no one knew that when the spiritual qi of the fifth dimension recovered, in the starry sky where Mu Nianyan's main body was located, some strange special energy began to gather towards Mu Nianyan's main body. However, this energy was very little. On this day, Yixian came to the sword sect. At this time, there were more than 280 swordsmen in the sword sect. Over 200 swordsmen, and the weakest was at the Returnance realm. As for Lu Yunxian, Gunyan, and the others, they had reached the true self-release realm. The current sword sect didn't just have swordsmen in the fifth dimension, it also had swordsmen from the sixth dimension and the entire Dao world. Yixian gathered all the swordsmen in the sword sect. He glanced at all the swordsmen and said, "All of you must reach the self-release realm. Anyone who has reached the true self-release realm can come find me, and I will tell them what realm is above the self-release realm." The swordsmen were instantly excited when they heard this. They knew that Yixian's realm in the Sword Dao was above the self-release realm. Pursuing the peak of the Sword Dao was the dream of all swordsmen. Meanwhile, Yixian slowly closed his eyes. Everyone, even though the fifth dimension has been suppressed by us, and the fifth dimension is slowly recovering its calm. However, our true problem still hasn't been solved. The doubting won't give up. I hope that the next time we face the doubting, everyone can be by my side and attack together with me. Saying this, he glanced at all the swordsmen. I will give you the best resources and the best conditions. As long as you have the fucking ability, I, Yixian, am willing to share all the Dao scriptures I have with you, as well as my experience in the sword Dao. Anything I know, I am willing to share with you. Everyone was looking at Yixian in that way. Yixian glanced at them. The matter between us and the doubting hasn't ended. The matter between us and them has just begun. Saying this, he turned around and left. In the distance, Yixian's expression gradually became malevolent. If he had been a bit stronger, if everyone in the fifth dimension had been a bit stronger, Sister Nian wouldn't have died. Unfortunately, there were no ifs. For him, there were only two things in his life. The first was revenge. If he didn't take revenge, he, Yixian, would be a waste of his humanity. The second was to protect. To protect what Sister Nian wanted to protect. As long as he, Yixian, existed, the fifth dimension would always exist. P.S. I have two things to do in my life. Asking for votes. Asking for rewards. Regardless of whether you give it or not, this is my request. This is my attitude. If you don't like it, come and hit me. Chapter 1348. Sword Sect. Ever since Yixian took over the Sword Sect, he began to spare no effort to nurture the Sword Sect. These swordsmen, at present, were the strongest group in the fifth dimension besides Arrow and the others. However, compared to Doubting, they were still too weak. These swordsmen must all reach Release 1. Only by reaching Release 1 could they barely contend against Doubting. And it was not difficult for these swordsmen to reach Release 1. Yixian not only gave them cultivation resources, but also shared Dao scriptures. Moreover, these swordsmen's talent was not low. Under such circumstances, it was only a matter of time before they reached Release 1. After leaving the Sword Sect, Yixian found Ajiao and Sidu. In the bamboo house, Yixian sat in front of the two women. He looked at Ajiao. Senior sister, I need you to stay. Ajiao picked up the wine gourd on the table and drained it in one gulp. Sure. She really treated Yixian as her junior brother. Although she knew that this junior brother might be fake, she still took it seriously. At this moment, Sidu asked, why? Yixian did not say anything and got up to leave. Sidu looked at Ajiao. What does he mean? Ajiao was expressionless. He knows that you will stay. Sidu was puzzled. What makes him think that I will stay? Ajiao said softly, if you wanted to leave, you would have left long ago. Situ was silent. Ajiao said softly, he has matured a lot. The him in the past was always laughing and joking, but now, I'm afraid that the him in the past will never come back. Situ seemed to have thought of something and sighed softly. 3 days later, Yixian went to the underworld. Beside him were Wuxia and Xianxia. The lord of the underworld was dead, but the underworld still existed. On the way, Wuxia glanced at Yixian. Brother Yi, why do you want me to go to the underworld? Yixian said softly, you've been trapped in the underworld for 20,000 years. Don't you have any other thoughts? Hearing this, Wuxia understood Yixian's meaning. At this time, Yixian asked again, may I know where Brother Wuxin is from? Wuxia looked at Yixian and said with a smile, a rogue cultivator, really? Yixian thought about it and said, why don't we stay in the fifth dimension? After being silent for a long time, Wuxia said, the fifth dimension is rich in spiritual qi and is indeed very suitable for living, but at this point, he didn't continue. Yixian suddenly said, I have 4 Dao scriptures, and there will be more. Wuxia immediately sternly said, Brother Yi, you're treating me like an outsider. Did I stay in the 5 dimensions for the Dao scripture? No, I really think this place is very good. In short, the 5 dimensions will be my home in the future. Even if I die, I will die in the 5 dimensions. At the side, 3 lives glanced at Wu Exin and said, You're quite thick-skinned. Wu Exin. At this time, Yi Xian suddenly said, If you stay here, you will have to fight against the doubting. Have you thought it through? Wu Exin said with a smile, I understand. Yi Xian nodded slightly and didn't say anything else. What the 5 dimensions lacked the most was experts, and with the Tao scripture, he could recruit many experts. Half a year. In this half a year, he had to strengthen the 5 dimensions and himself. Before long, the 3 of them arrived at the underworld. As soon as Yi Xian arrived, the King of Hell appeared in front of him. King of Hell was about to speak when Yi Xian suddenly slashed with his sword. King of Hell's head flew off, and at the same time, his soul was directly absorbed by the soul-suppressing sword. At the sight of this, Wu Exin and 3 lives' expressions changed. Wu Exin was shocked. This Yi Xian's strength had reached such a level. Killing a peak Tao confirming expert with 1 sword strike. Although he was restrained by the sword, this was still too terrifying. At the side, 3 lives was shocked by Yi Xian's actions. In her opinion, Yi Xian's trip to the underworld was definitely to subdue it, but now it seemed that this was not the case. Yi Xian looked into the distance, opened his palm, and the soul-suppressing sword flew out. In the next moment, the entire underworld was filled with wailing. The soul-suppressing sword madly absorbed the souls of the underworld. At the sight of this, Wu Exion's expression became incomparably solemn. Yi Xian wanted to destroy the underworld. In the distance, Yi Xian's expression was calm, and there was only indifference in his eyes. At this moment, Yin and Nanzong suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. Yin looked at Yi Xian. What are you going to do? Yi Xian didn't speak, and the soul-suppressing sword in the distance was still madly absorbing the souls around it. The current soul-suppressing sword was at the peak of Tao-confirming realm. It could even be said that it could fight against some Tao-controlling realm divine objects. And in this underworld, the soul-suppressing sword could be said to be invincible, because it was too much of a bane to the soul. Yin stared at Yi Xian. You want to destroy the underworld. Yi Xian looked at Yin. Is there a problem? Yin said in a deep voice, You can't do this. Yi Xian asked with a smile, Why? His smile was cold and it made people shudder. Yin said in a deep voice, Yi Xian, there are many Yin spirits in the underworld. If you... Yi Xian suddenly slapped out. But Yin was directly slapped hundreds of meters away by Yi Xian. He looked straight at Yin and asked, When the Lord of the Underworld helped doubting destroy the 5th dimension, Miss Yin, did you try to persuade the Lord of the Underworld? You should know that there are many living beings in the 5th dimension. Yin was silent. Yi Xian said again, When the Lord of the Underworld went to destroy the 5th dimension, you didn't try to persuade him. Now, when I came to destroy the underworld, you came to persuade me, talking to me about the many Yin spirits in the underworld. Don't you think your behavior is ridiculous? Yin looked at Yi Xian. Can't you just let the underworld go? Yi Xian suddenly said fiercely, Can't the Lord of the Underworld let the 5th dimension go? Yin was about to speak, but at this moment, Yi Xian's soul-suppressing sword suddenly fell on top of Yin's head. Seeing this, Yin and Sansheng's expressions changed greatly. Yi Xian looked at Yin. Sansheng is my friend. I don't want to kill her friend and make her sad, so I won't kill you. Yin's expression was a bit ugly. At this moment, she suddenly remembered something. That day, Moon Yanyan plotted to make Yi Xian return the favor he owed her. If that favor hadn't been returned, she should be able to protect the underworld now. Thinking of this, a bitter smile appeared on Yin's face. At this time, Yi Xian waved his fingers, and soul-suppressing sword flew out again. Soon, soul-suppressing sword directly entered Fengdu City. Absorb. Soul-suppressing sword was like a wolf in a flock of sheep in the underworld. Everything in the underworld was great nourishment for it. On the side, Nanzong didn't say anything, because he had already felt Yi Xian's killing intent. Yin had Sansheng as a friend, but he didn't. He knew that if he opened his mouth, Yi Xian would definitely kill. Right now, Yi Xian only wanted to kill. Indeed, he could subdue the underworld, but he didn't want to, because Sister Nian was dead. He wouldn't let anyone who was once his enemy go. On the side, Sanxing walked to Yin's side. Yin looked at Sanxing with a pleading look in her eyes. Sanxing shook her head. She knew that Yi Xian wouldn't let the underworld go. In fact, she didn't want to let the underworld go either. However, she didn't want to destroy the underworld. In the past, when she said she wanted to attack the underworld, she only wanted to kill the Lord of the Underworld and those experts. And what Yi Xian wanted to do now was to destroy the underworld. At this time, Yi Xian suddenly said, "That Dao Lord Qing Ming isn't in the underworld?" On the side, Nanzong put his palms together. When he learned that young Master Yi came to the underworld, he had already left. Yi Xian nodded slightly and disappeared. When he reappeared, he was already in the underworld's Fengdu city. Yi Xian began to frantically plunder all the treasures in the underworld. What the fifth dimension lacked the most right now was resources. This was because he wanted to nurture a group of super experts. And as a superpower, how could the underworld lack treasures? Before long, all the valuable treasures in the underworld were collected by Yi Xian, including the Yellow Springs River. What was worth mentioning was that he obtained 26 drops of Yellow Springs holy water. These 26 drops of Yellow Springs holy water could greatly enhance a cultivator's soul. With these 26 drops of Yellow Springs holy water, the souls of Arrow and the others would undergo a qualitative change. As if thinking of something, Yi Xian pointed with his finger, and a drop of Yellow Springs holy water landed in front of Wu Xen. Wu Xen blinked. "For me." Yi Xian nodded. Wu Xen hesitated for a moment, then said, "Brother Yi, aren't you afraid that I will take your benefits and leave?" Yi Xian shook his head. "You won't." Wu Xen was somewhat curious. "Why?" Yi Xian softly said, "If you were that kind of person, you wouldn't have been trapped in the underworld for 20,000 years. Wu Xen was stunned for a moment, then he laughed loudly. Why was he trapped in the underworld for 20,000 years? Because he didn't surrender. If he had lowered his head back then, he would have immediately escaped. But he didn't. A person with such unyielding character would not do that kind of thing. Wu Xen glanced at Yi Xian, then said with a smile, "Brother Yi, I have received benefits from you. You can rest assured that I, Wu Xian, will live and die with the fifth dimension. I will do what I say." After saying that, he put away the Yellow Springs holy water. In any case, he had nowhere to go now, so he might as well stay in the fifth dimension. At least, this brother Yi in front of him looked very good. He was to Wu Xian's liking. About half an hour later, a powerful aura suddenly soared from Fengdu City. Bang! In an instant, a destructive aura of the soul swept through the sky above Fengdu City, and it was so strong that it caused the expressions of everyone here to change. Even Yi Xian was the same. Because he actually sensed danger at this moment. His soul sensed danger. As for the spirit of the underworld, Yin's body had even started trembling. Her eyes were filled with fear as she gazed at Fengdu City. Yi Xian gazed up at the sky above Fengdu City. A black vortex of the soul had suddenly appeared there, and then an extremely terrifying aura of the soul swept out from within the vortex. The aura grew stronger and stronger, and it suddenly underwent a qualitative change after around 15 minutes passed. Bang! The heavens and the earth trembled. The Dao control realm. The expressions of everyone in the surroundings had changed. The soul-suppressing sword has actually advanced from the peak of the Dao verification realm to the Dao control realm? Can you believe that a sword has attained the Dao control realm? Moreover, its master is at the Dao verification realm. Will this sword still acknowledge Yi Xian as its master? Meanwhile, a woman walked out slowly from within the black vortex. She seemed to be around 16 or 17 years old, wore a black dress, and had pitch-black pupils. At the instant she appeared, Yin's body trembled even more violently. Nanzang's expression had become quite unsightly as well, because he felt fear from within his soul. Nanzong gazed at Yi Xian. Will Yi Xian be able to subdue this sword? Right at this moment, the woman walked over to Yi Xian, and then she suddenly hugged Yi Xian and spoke excitedly, "Young master." I'm at the Dao control realm. All of them were speechless. The apex. Chapter 1349. This woman was, of course, Little Soul. Hearing Little Soul's words, a rare smile appeared on Yi Xian's calm face. He was only happy that Little Soul had reached the Dao defense realm. He didn't think of Little Soul as a sword, but as his sister. And Little Soul had never thought of betraying Yi Xian. She had reached the Dao defense realm, but in her heart, Yi Xian would always be her master. Along the way, if not for Yi Xian, she would never have reached this step. Most importantly, Yi Xian treated her as family, and she also treated Yi Xian as family. The relationship between the two was not that of a sword and its master, but more like that of a brother and a sister. Yi Xian gently rubbed Little Soul's hair and said softly, "You are now at the Dao defense realm." Little Soul smiled proudly, "Young master, I am very, very powerful now." Yi Xian nodded slightly, "Little Soul, take care of me in the future." Little Soul grinned, "Young master, I still have to absorb the power of those souls. If you want to fight, call me at any time. I can fight many now." Yi Xian smiled slightly, "Okay." Little Soul hugged Yi Xian again, and then she returned to the prison pagoda. Yi Xian looked around. At this time, the nether realm was unusually quiet, because all the souls had been absorbed by the soul-suppressing sword. In fact, he was not surprised that Little Soul could reach the Dao defense realm. When he was doubting, he slaughtered countless doubting powerhouses, and every time he killed, the soul-suppressing sword would absorb their souls. Now, it had absorbed the souls of the entire nether realm, Dao defense realm. Now with the soul-suppressing sword, it was not too easy to kill ordinary Dao defense powerhouses, but it would not be too difficult either. Of course, this was far from enough for him. Yi Xian collected his thoughts and looked at Yin. Where are the other 2 Dao scriptures? He remembered that there were 2 Dao scriptures in the underworld, and the real reason he came to the underworld this time was for these Dao scriptures. Yin said in a low voice, "There is a Daoist scripture on the Lord of the underworld, but he has already been killed." Yi Xian frowned. Meanwhile, Nanzong spoke abruptly, "That scripture has fallen into the hands of the doubting." Yi Xian looked at Nanzang, and Nanzang said softly, "The Lord of the underworld had already given the Dao scripture to doubting many years ago. As far as I know, he used that Dao scripture to make a deal with doubting." Yi Xian asked, "If the scripture is so precious, why would he be willing to exchange it with the doubting?" Nanzang shook his head. "It's precisely because it's so precious that he had no choice but to exchange it. That Dao scripture is very important to doubting. The Lord of the underworld was also forced to give it to doubting. In the hands of doubting. In other words, it was very likely to be in the hands of the Dao ancestor." Yi Xian was silent for a moment, then asked again, "What about the other one?" Yin said in a low voice, "The 18th level of hell." "The 18th level of hell. The Dao breaker." Yi Xian was silent. He remembered that Mu Nian had said that Sister Nian had originally wanted to kill the Dao breaker, and the reason why Sister Nian had this thought was probably because of the Dao scripture. Because Sister Nian knew that he would continue to search for the Dao scripture, and that the mysterious expert in the 18th level of hell could pose a threat to him, so Sister Nian had wanted to kill the Dao breaker, but she had given up. Thinking of this, Yi Xian suddenly said, "Sansheng, Wuxia, you 2 stay here. I will go to the 18th level of hell." Hearing this, Sansheng's expression changed. "That place is very dangerous." Yi Xian said softly, "Sister Nian did not kill the Dao breaker." With that he disappeared on the spot. Next to him, Yin looked at Sansheng. "What does he mean?" Sansheng said in a low voice, "Mu Nian, that woman is meticulous. Since she did not kill the Dao breaker in the 18th level of hell, it means that the Dao breaker is not a threat to her." Yin frowned. "Just because of this?" Sansheng nodded. Yin was speechless. Yi Xian came to hell. This hell had a total of 18 levels, each more terrifying than the one before. And each level imprisoned some evil spirits that had committed evil in life, and these evil spirits had to be tortured here. After a while, Yi Xian came to the 18th level. The 18th level of hell was very cold and bleak. Yi Xian saw a man. The man was chained by 4 pitch-black iron chains. Below him was a burning flame. 9 nether divine fire. Specialized in burning souls. However, this man's strength was too strong. The power of the 9 nether divine fire could make him feel pain, but it could not burn him to death. Yi Xian looked at the man. The man did not have any aura. He looked like an ordinary person. Dao breaker. Yi Xian walked towards the man. At this time, the man suddenly looked up. Yi Xian frowned, because at this moment, he found that the man did not have eyes. The man suddenly said hoarsely, "Scram." Yi Xian opened his palm. In his hand was the Tendo sword. Sister Nian's sword. At this time, the man frowned. That woman's aura. Obviously, he was talking about Mu Niannian. Yi Xian nodded, yes. After a moment of silence, the man said, "She asked you to come?" Yi Xian asked, "Did she say anything when she came here?" The man said, "She wanted to kill me." Yi Xian, the man said again, "But she gave up." Yi Xian asked, "Why?" The man did not answer. Yi Xian said softly, "I came here for the Dao scripture." The man suddenly laughed. Yi Xian asked, "Why are you laughing, senior?" The man chuckled, "You have already walked your own path. Why do you need to cling to the Dao scripture?" Yi Xian shook his head. "My own path is a path. The path of others is also a path. There are countless paths to the Grand Dao. There is no need to cling to one." The man was silent. Yi Xian asked again, "Can senior give it to me?" The man said, "Yes." Saying so, a black ancient scroll suddenly floated in front of Yi Xian. Yi Xian put the Dao scripture away. "Thank you, farewell." Saying so, he turned around and left. At this time, the man suddenly said, "She has fallen. Is that right?" Yi Xian stopped and nodded. The man said, "I admire her very much, not just because of her strength." Yi Xian suddenly said, "Senior, I hope you won't be angry if I say a few more words." The man said, "What are you trying to say?" Yi Xian turned around to look at the man. "Since senior imprisoned yourself here, you must have done something that you regret, right?" The man was silent. Yi Xian continued, "I also did something that I regret for the rest of my life, but I will not imprison myself, because that is hiding. A man can be wrong, but he cannot hide, because a wrong is a wrong. And hiding, with all due respect, is the behavior of a coward." The man did not get angry. He only said softly, "You have no idea what I did. I killed the love of my life. Do you understand?" Yi Xian asked, "Why did you kill her?" The man's body suddenly trembled. "Do you know what realm is above Imperial Dao?" Yi Xian shook his head. The man said, "Above Imperial Dao is achieving the Dao. The so-called achieving the Dao is to become the Dao, the 3,000 Grand Daos, one of these Grand Daos, and there are many ways to achieve the Dao. In the end, I chose to become heartless. Because being heartless is equivalent to giving up, and there is nothing simpler than giving up in this world. Thus, I gave up on everyone around me, including the woman I love the most. I told her that after I achieve the Dao, I will come and get you. Do you know? That woman foolishly waited for me for over 1,000 years, and in the end, she became a skeleton." Yi Xian suddenly said, "Animal?" The man laughed loudly. Well scolded, I am an animal, an out-and-out animal." Yi Xian asked, "You didn't succeed?" The man shook his head. "I didn't succeed." Yi Xian asked again, "Why?" The man suddenly laughed. "Because I can't forget her, I can't be truly heartless, but I abandoned her because I achieved the Dao. Isn't it ironic?" Yi Xian was silent. The man was still laughing, but as he laughed, he started crying. "I didn't regret not achieving the Dao, I regretted giving her that promise. If I didn't give her that promise, if I didn't give her that hope, she might not have waited for me like that. But I really didn't think that she would take my promise seriously. That silly woman, how can a man's promise be trusted?" Yi Xian shook his head. "She loves you, so even if she knew that what you said might be false, she still chose to believe it. Perhaps this is love. Even if I see you lying through your teeth, I still choose to believe it." The man was still laughing. His laughter was very sad. Yes, she chose to believe me, but I am not worthy of her trust. After she died, I could achieve the Tao. Because at that time, there would be nothing in this world worth thinking about. I could achieve true desirelessness, only the Tao in my heart. However, at that time, I realized that even if I achieved the Tao, what was the point? It was meaningless. Everything was meaningless. Yi Xian was silent. It had to be said that he was quite shocked. The person in front of him could achieve the Tao at any time. But now, the other party had imprisoned him here, unable to forgive him. Yi Xian sighed softly. Senior, do you think that the woman you love really loves you? The man looked at Yi Xian, and Yi Xian said softly, she loves you so much, just think about it, would she really be willing to see you torment yourself like this? In my opinion, she definitely wouldn't, or rather, if she saw you torturing yourself like this, how sad would she be? I can understand that you can't forgive yourself, but what you're doing now is still meaningless. Either you live well or you die. The man was silent. Yi Xian was about to speak, but the man suddenly said, you're right, she definitely wouldn't want to see me like this, since that's the case. As he spoke, his body suddenly started to disappear at a speed visible to the naked eye. Seeing this, Yi Xian's expression changed greatly. Damn, this guy chose to die. Did he say something wrong? P.S. 1 vote, 2 votes, 3 to 4 votes, 5 to 6 votes, 7 to 8 votes, thousands of votes, countless votes, always laughing in my dreams. Fix. Chapter 1350. Seeing the man's body becoming more and more illusory, Yi Xian hurriedly said, Senior, you. The man suddenly chuckled, this is my choice. Yi Xian solemnly said, Senior, why don't you choose to live on? The man smiled, because it is meaningless. Yi Xian was silent for a moment, then said, I understand, Senior. The man laughed, thank you. Yi Xian slightly bowed to the man, then turned and left. At this time, the man suddenly said, Young man, remember, if you don't have the ability, don't make promises to others. Yi Xian nodded, I understand. After saying that, he disappeared into the distance. Behind him, the man's body became more and more illusory, until he completely disappeared. No one knew that one of the most powerful beings in the world had disappeared without a trace just like that. Achieving Tao. Even in the doubting, there were only a few of them. At the exit of hell, Yi Xian quietly sighed. In fact, his heart was a little complicated. He wanted to enlighten that senior, but he did not expect that he would say that person dead. Although this was the other person's choice, it was also related to him. However, if he was given another chance, he would still do the same. If that man continued to live like this, he would rather die. Yi Xian lightly patted his mouth. Looks like I have to be careful with my words in the future. After saying that, he disappeared. Yi Xian left the netherworld with 3 lives and Wu Xi. This time, he not only took a Tao scripture with him, but also all the treasures of the netherworld. After returning to the 5th dimension, Yi Xian immediately gave those treasures to Guan Yin. He only had one request, to focus on nurturing Arrow and the others, as well as the sword sex swordsman. In the courtyard, Yi Xian and Yi Jiming sat facing each other. In front of them was the Tao scripture. Volume 5, Grand Tao. Yi Xian looked at Yi Jiming. Yi Jiming opened the Tao scripture and softly recited, Tao begets 1, 1 begets 2, 2 begets 3, 3 begets all things. All living things bear the yin and embrace the yang, and the qi is harmonious. Moments later, she looked at Yi Xian. The core of this Tao scripture is the great Tao. If you know, you will act accordingly. If you do well, you will understand. If you understand, you will defend. She then passed the Tao scripture to Yi Xian. This scroll can help you reach the Tao defense realm. Yi Xian did not look at it. Instead, he passed the Tao scripture to Yi Jiming. I've just reached the confirming Tao stage and it's not suitable for me to advance to the Imperial Tao. Help me look at the Tao scripture martial arts in this scroll. Yi Jiming nodded. Alright. She picked up the Tao scripture and carefully looked at it. After a long time, she looked at Yi Xian. The martial name of this Tao scripture is Tao Fist. In the name of the great Tao, transform the great Tao into a fist, and one fist is the great Tao. Yi Xian asked softly, "Is it powerful?" Yi Jiming nodded. "It's at least twice as good as seeking death." She then looked at Yi Xian. "There are 9 scrolls in the Tao scripture, and the martial arts in the last 5 scrolls are stronger than the previous ones. It's a pity that you didn't get the 6th scroll. Otherwise, you could cultivate the legendary Tao scripture body tempering art." Yi Xian looked at the Tao scripture. Slowly, "One day, we will collect all the Tao scriptures." Yi Jiming sighed softly. The remaining Tao scriptures were either in the hands of the doubting or the Tao tomb. It would be harder than ascending to the heavens to obtain the remaining Tao scriptures. Yi Xian suddenly said, "We can do it." Yi Jiming looked at Yi Xian and said softly, "All right." Yi Xian said, "I'm going into seclusion." Yi Jiming said, "I'll go with you." Yi Xian nodded. All right. In the following time, Yi Xian went into seclusion to cultivate the Tao fist. Tao fist. Tao as a fist. What is the great Tao? Tao without form. It had to be said that cultivating this Tao fist was extraordinarily difficult. This was because this Tao fist was not for Tao validation realm cultivators to cultivate, but for Tao defense realm cultivators to cultivate. Because only Tao defense realm cultivators had a clear understanding of the great Tao. Fortunately, with Yi Jiming's help, even though it was still difficult to cultivate, it wasn't impossible. During the time Yi Xian went into seclusion, the 5th dimension became better and better. The main thing was unity. The current 5th dimension was too united. Everyone was working hard for the same goal. Coupled with the little white guy and the spiritual veins, the recovery speed of the 5th dimension after the calamity could only be described as terrifying. The overall strength of the 5th dimension was also improving quickly, especially the sword sect. Almost every day, there would be a swordsman reaching the self-release realm. Everyone was fighting with their lives. Not for Yi Xian, not for the 5th dimension, but for themselves. In the past, there was no path, and many people reached the end of the road. But now, some people gave them a path. As long as they had the ability, they could continue walking. Therefore, everyone was fighting with their lives on the line. Many times, unity was actually maintained by benefits. Yi Xian was not a saint. He did not think that he had the charisma to make these experts in the 5th dimension risk their lives for him. What he could do was to use benefits to bind these people together and make them change. As long as the benefits were enough, these people would change. As for internal conflicts, although there were some, they were still within the scope of control. Doubting was also paying attention to the situation in the 5th dimension. Doubting, in a dilapidated hall. Bai Dizzy sat quietly. In front of him stood an old man who was constantly reporting the situation in the 5th dimension to him. After a long time, Bai Dizzy slowly closed his eyes. Big trouble. Big trouble. Now, doubting not only had a big enemy in the Tao tomb, but also a big trouble in the form of Yi Xian. This was not a good thing for doubting. Below, the old man said in a deep voice, "Although Yi Xian is the only one who has reached Tao validation in the 5th dimension, there is a group of people, such as Arrow and the others. These people have a high chance of reaching Tao validation. Moreover, there are more and more self-release realm experts in the 5th dimension. We must think of a way to restrain them. Otherwise, these people will become a big enemy of doubting in the future." Bai Dizzy suddenly said, "How is the situation in the 2 realms abyss?" The old man's face became serious. "It is still a stalemate. We have already lost 3 divine monarchs." 3 divine monarchs. Hearing this, Bai Dizzy's face also became serious. Every divine monarch was a peak Tao defense realm expert. One could imagine how fierce the battle was with 3 of them dying. The old man said in a deep voice, "The situation over there is also very serious. Even true martial monarch has personally taken action. As for the 5th dimension, we must think of a way to destroy them. Otherwise, it will not be so easy for us to destroy them in the future." Bai Dizzy stood up and walked to the entrance of the hall. He looked into the distance and saw a mess. These were all left behind by Yi Xian. "Yi Xian, At this moment he thought of the madman Yi Xian. That person had killed a heavenly king and a divine general. Moreover, Yi Xian was only at the self-release realm at that time. But now, Yi Xian had reached the Dao validation realm. What if Yi Xian reached the Dao defense realm? Bai Dizzy slowly closed his eyes. Yi Xian at the Dao defense realm. How terrifying would that be? The Dao tomb was a great danger, and so was Yi Xian. After a long time, Bai Dizzy suddenly said, "You guys stay here. I will go to the abyss." After saying this, he disappeared. In the 5th dimension. After 5 days of seclusion, Yi Xian left his room. He came to the starry sky and slowly clenched his right hand into a fist. There was not the slightest energy fluctuation in his fist. After a moment of silence, Yi Xian suddenly threw a punch. Boom! In an instant, the starry sky in the distance suddenly became dead silent. His punch forcibly erased that piece of starry sky. Dao Fist. The Dao Fist contained the Great Dao. The power of this punch was enough to easily destroy a peak Dao validation realm expert. Even an ordinary Dao defense realm expert would not be able to withstand the power of this punch. At this moment, Yi Jiming suddenly appeared next to Yi Xian. She said in a deep voice, "I received news that Doubting Emperor Bai Xingjun went to the abyss." Yi Xian frowned. Doubting wants to rope in the abyss. Yi Jiming nodded. Yi Xian looked at Yi Jiming. "Will the abyss follow the doubting?" Yi Jiming said in a deep voice, "If the doubting is willing to help the abyss cleanse its sins, then the abyss will definitely be willing to follow the doubting." Yi Xian looked at Yi Jiming. "What do you think?" Yi Jiming was silent. Yi Xian said softly, "You don't want the abyss to follow the doubting, right?" Yi Jiming nodded. "That is my home." Yi Xian said softly, "Let's go to the abyss." Yi Jiming looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian said, "I will go with you." Yi Jiming was silent. Yi Xian said, "I will go with you. Tell the abyss not to join the doubting." Yi Jiming said in a deep voice, "What if they don't agree?" Yi Xian said softly, "Then I will destroy the abyss." Yi Jiming, Yi Xian and Yi Jiming left the 5th dimension and headed for the abyss. In the starry sky, Yi Xian was flying on his sword. Beside Yi Xian was Yi Jiming. Yi Jiming glanced at Yi Xian. She discovered that ever since Moon Yanyan died, Yi Xian's personality had undergone an earth-shattering change. Yi Xian was no longer as jovial as before. He was no longer as scheming as before. The current Yi Xian was much more ruthless than before. For example, destroying the underworld. If it was before, Yi Xian would definitely have subdued the underworld and made it submit. But now, Yi Xian had directly destroyed all the spirits in the underworld. Yi Jiming sighed in her heart. She knew that the once frivolous Yi Xian would not return anytime soon. About 2 hours later, Yi Xian and Yi Jiming arrived in front of an abyss. The abyss was thousands of feet long and wide, surrounded by clouds and mist. Yi Jiming said softly, "This is the abyss." Yi Xian nodded, "Let's go down." At this time, a man suddenly appeared in front of the two. When the man saw Yi Jiming, he was stunned for a moment before laughing loudly, "Bitch, you actually dare to return you." At this time, Yi Xian suddenly appeared in front of the man. The next moment his left hand grabbed the man's shoulder and his right hand stabbed the man's abdomen. Behind the man, blood splattered. The man's eyes widened as he looked at Yi Xian in disbelief. "You?" Yi Xian pulled out his sword and said softly, "Be more polite when you speak in your next life." After saying that, he turned to Yi Jiming, "You don't seem to be that popular in the abyss." Yi Jiming nodded. Yi Xian walked in front of Yi Jiming and held her hand as they walked down. "The abyss doesn't like you, but I do." Yi Jiming was silent. At this moment, she suddenly felt a sense of sorrow. Her clansmen were inferior to outsiders. FPZW. Chapter 1351. Big Abyss. Through his conversation with Yi Jiming, Yi Xian gained some understanding of Big Abyss. Although Big Abyss's overall strength was not as strong as Doubting's, it was not weak either. Most importantly, Big Abyss was the guardian of the Dao scripture. However, this identity did not bring them any glory. On the contrary, it became a shackle for them. Sinners. They were punished to this Tao scripture guardian because they had sinned. The purpose of Big Abyss was very simple. It was to restore freedom. However, this was very difficult. In a wooden hall, two old men sat facing each other. One of the old men was Bai Dizzy. The other old man was Big Abyss's current Abyss Master, Qiu Lin. Qiu Lin looked at Bai Dizzy. What Star-Lord said just now, is it true? Bai Dizzy nodded. Abyss Master Qiu, do you think there is a need for me to come here and play such a big joke with you? Qiu Lin was silent. Bai Dizzy looked at Qiu Lin. As long as Big Abyss is willing to be with doubting, I, doubting, am willing to help Big Abyss remove the shackle on its body. Abyss Master Qiu, you should understand that in all the heavens only I, doubting, have this ability. Abyss Master Qiu looked at Bai Dizzy. You want me, Big Abyss, to deal with Yi Xian? Bai Dizzy nodded. Yes. Very frank. Qiu Lin was silent. The current five-dimensional universe was not the five-dimensional universe of the past. Moreover, he knew about doubting and doubt. This Yi Xian was not easy to deal with. Bai Dizzy smiled and said, I know that Your Excellency is a little afraid of Yi Xian. However, Your Excellency should be clear that the reason why I, the doubting, cannot kill Yi Xian now is mainly because my doubting army is in the Two Realms Abyss. If the battle in the Two Realms Abyss ends, then I, the doubting, can destroy Yi Xian with a flip of my hand. However, it's precisely because of this that I, doubting, have no way to deal with Yi Xian. Therefore, I want to borrow Big Yuan's strength. Although the overall strength of the fifth dimension is not bad, it has not fully matured yet. Now is the best time to destroy the fifth dimension. Qiu Lin looked at Bai Dizzy. Lord Tai Bai jinxing, as far as I know, Yi Xian charged into the doubting alone and came out alive. Bai Dizzy smiled. Yes. However, that's because my doubting experts are all in the Two Realms Abyss. Qiu Lin was about to speak when an old man appeared in the wooden house. The old man said in a deep voice, That girl Jiming has brought Yi Xian here. Yi Xian. Hearing this, Bai Dizzy's eyelids twitched. This guy actually came. Should he run away first? Of course not. If he ran away now, wouldn't that be equivalent to being afraid of Yi Xian? Not only would he lose face, but he would also lose doubting's reputation. Qiu Lin glanced at Lord Tai Bai jinxing. Lord Tai Bai jinxing's expression was calm. Qiu Lin suddenly said, Please. The current Yi Xian was not an ordinary person. Big Yuan had no choice but to treat him with caution. Soon, Yi Xian and Yi Jiming appeared in the wood hall. When he saw Bai Dizzy, Yi Jiming's brows slightly furrowed. Yi Xian glanced at Bai Dizzy. Bai Dizzy smiled. Young Master Yi, don't come. Yi Xian suddenly drew his sword and slashed. A ray of sword light slashed straight at Bai Dizzy. Bai Dizzy's eyelids twitched. Damn, why did this person directly attack? Bai Dizzy waved his right hand. A golden round shield suddenly appeared in front of him. Boom! The golden round shield directly shattered. Bai Dizzy looked at Yi Xian. Young Master Yi, although I doubting and the five-dimensional universe are opponents, Yi Xian suddenly disappeared from the spot. Bai Dizzy's expression changed. His figure trembled and directly disappeared. When he reappeared, he was already hundreds of thousands of miles away. Yi Xian was stunned. Wasn't this guy running too fast? Qiu Lin was also slightly stunned. This Emperor Bai ran away just like that? Qiu Lin's expression became somewhat strange. He actually ran away. How were they going to negotiate? At this time, Yi Jiming suddenly looked at Qiu Lin. Does Patriarch want to ally with doubting? Qiu Lin looked at Yi Jiming. They can help us get rid of our punishment. Yi Jiming was silent. Doubting indeed had the ability to help Big Abyss get rid of its punishment. Yi Jiming looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian suddenly said, In that case, Big Abyss has chosen to ally with doubting? Qiu Lin looked at Yi Xian. Young Master Yi, it's fine if you don't want us to ally with doubting. As long as young Master Yi is willing to hand over the Tao scriptures, I can guarantee to young Master Yi that I, Big Abyss, will never ally with doubting. Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes. Yi Zhiming, enter the pagoda. After a moment of silence, Yi Zhiming entered the World Prison Pagoda. Yi Xian opened his palm, and the soul-suppressing sword appeared in his hand. Seeing this, Qiu Lin's expression changed. What do you want to do? Yi Xian looked at Qiu Lin. Dao Ting is my enemy, and Big Abyss has chosen to ally with Dao Ting. It's clear that he wants to deal with me, Yi Xian. Since that's the case, I choose to make the first move. Qiu Lin said angrily, Yi Xian, you dare. This is Big Abyss, not the fifth dimension. Yi Xian suddenly said, is this place more dangerous than Dao Ting? Qiu Lin was speechless. At this time, dozens of experts had gathered outside the wood hall. Among them, the weakest was its self-release one. Yi Xian suddenly disappeared. Numerous shrill cries resounded outside the wood hall. Qiu Lin's expression changed drastically, and he charged out of the wood hall. There were already 3 corpses outside the wood hall. These corpses were all the corpses of Dao validation experts. In just a few breaths of time, 3 Dao validation experts had perished. All the experts of Big Abyss were stunned. Yi Xian turned to look at Qiu Lin. Not letting your Big Abyss follow doubting is for your own good, not for my own good. Qiu Lin stared fixedly at Yi Xian. At this time, Yi Zhiming appeared by Yi Xian's side. Qiu Lin's expression instantly became ferocious. What? Did you bring him to Big Abyss on purpose to show off? Yi Zhiming frowned slightly. At this time, Yi Xian suddenly vanished on the spot. In the distance, Qiu Lin's expression changed drastically. He suddenly clenched his right hand into a fist. In an instant, his fist was covered in ghastly white flames. In the next moment, he punched out. A ray of light instantly tore through the flames, and then Qiu Lin's right arm flew into the air. In the next moment, a sword was pressed against the center of Qiu Lin's forehead. Qiu Lin was stunned. I lost with a single move? Yi Zhiming was about to speak when Yi Xian suddenly slashed with his sword. Qiu Lin's head flew into the air. Blood sprayed. The expressions of all the experts of the Big Abyss changed drastically, but no one dared to make a move. That was an instant kill. How terrifying is Yi Xian's strength? Yi Zhiming was stunned as well. She hadn't expected that Yi Xian would be able to kill Qiu Lin with a single strike. When did this fellow become so ruthless? This was really killing people at the slightest disagreement. Yi Xian suddenly gazed at Yi Zhiming. You be the master of the Big Abyss. Everyone was stunned, and it didn't take long for the experts of the Big Abyss to look at Yi Zhiming with hostile expressions. Yi Zhiming shook his head. No. Yi Xian suddenly took out 5 Dao scriptures and looked at the experts of the Big Abyss. I have 5 Dao scriptures, and mine is Yi Zhiming's. If she becomes the master of the Big Abyss, I, Yi Xian, will be the friend of the Big Abyss. The experts of the Big Abyss were silent. At this time, an old man suddenly walked out and glanced at Yi Xian. I heard that you shared Dao scriptures with the experts of the 5th dimension. Is that true? Yi Xian said, if not, why would there be so many self-release realm experts in the 5th dimension? The old man said in a deep voice, you have 5 Dao scriptures. Are you willing to share them with others? Yi Xian said, I am only willing to share them with my own people. The old man was silent for a moment, then looked at Yi Zhiming. Girl, have you seen them? Yi Zhiming nodded. The old man sighed. This old man admires young Master Ye's breadth of mind. He looked at Yi Zhiming. From now on, Yi Zhiming is the current master of the Big Abyss. Object? The experts of the Big Abyss looked at each other, but no one objected. There was only one thought in the minds of the experts of the Big Abyss, Dao scriptures. Yi Xian was really willing to share Dao scriptures. As for Qiu Lin, he had already been forgotten. Yi Xian looked at Yi Zhiming. Congratulations, you are now the master of the Big Abyss. Yi Zhiming was silent for a moment, then suddenly looked at the old man. Uncle Li Yuan, all the experts of the Big Abyss will go to the 5th dimension. Li Yuan was a little hesitant. Yi Zhiming said, anyone who goes to the 5th dimension, as long as their realm and strength are sufficient, I can explain Dao scriptures to them and help them break through. Before Li Yuan could speak, a Big Abyss expert quickly said, I am willing to go. The experts of the Big Abyss also expressed their willingness to go to the 5th dimension. Li Yuan did not speak, and Yi Jiming was also looking at Li Yuan. Li Yuan was the great elder of the Big Abyss, a person of virtue and prestige in the Big Abyss. He could influence too many people. Li Yuan suddenly looked at Yi Jiming and transmitted his voice using Xian Qi. What level has this young master Yi reached? Yi Jiming was silent for a moment, then transmitted his voice using Xian Qi. He can easily kill Dao controlling realm experts. Hearing this, Li Yuan slowly clenched his fists. Easily kill Dao controlling realm experts. Li Yuan suddenly said, to the 5th dimension. To the 5th dimension. Just like that, the Big Abyss joined the 5th dimension. With the addition of the Big Abyss, the strength of the 5th dimension was unprecedentedly strong. It could be said that the current mid-level strength of the 5th dimension was no less than that of Doubting, but the top Dao controlling realm experts were still no match for Doubting. However, Yi Xian also knew that this matter could not be rushed. Doubting. When learning that the Big Abyss had joined the 5th dimension, Bai Dizzy's expression suddenly became extremely ugly. He did not expect that Yi Xian would directly kill Qiu Lin and then use the Dao scripture to tempt the Big Abyss. It had to be said that Yi Xian was very resourceful. Bai Dizzy slowly closed his eyes. After a long time, he suddenly said, we can't fight with the Dao too many more. After saying this, he stood up and left. To the 2 worlds abyss. The people there still did not know how terrifying Yi Xian had become. After Yi Xian returned to the 5th dimension with the experts of the Big Abyss, he came to the starry sky and sat not far away from Mu Nianyan's main body. He slowly roasted the fish. After a long time, Yi Xian suddenly said, Sister Nian, the 5th dimension is getting better and better. But you won't be able to see it. There was no response. Yi Xian continued, the 5th dimension will get better and better. I will protect the 5th dimension, protect the sun, moon, and stars, protect this land. There was still no response. After a long time of silence, Yi Xian said softly, Sister Nian, I want revenge. I want to kill everyone in the Doubting. I will definitely do it. The starry sky was silent. Yi Xian looked up into the depths of the starry sky and said softly, what is Bai Dizzy thinking now? He must be thinking about how to kill me. Right now, there are no experts in the Doubting. There is only one way, and that is to stop the war with the Dao Tomb. Will they stop the war? Under normal circumstances, they definitely won't, but what if the Doubting makes a concession? After saying this, he retracted his gaze and looked at the bonfire in front of him. Right now, the overall strength of the 5th dimension is inferior to the Doubting. If they start a war with the Doubting, the 5th dimension will not be able to win. So, we can't let the Doubting stop the war with the Dao Tomb, but how can we make them continue to fight? After saying this, he looked at Mu Nianyan. If Sister Nian was here, what would you do? There was no response. At this time, Guan Yin suddenly appeared next to Yi Xian. Guan Yin said in a deep voice, someone from the Dao Tomb has come. Yi Xian looked at Guan Yin. The Dao Tomb? Guan Yin nodded. Her expression was a little strange. Yi Xian asked, what's the matter? Guan Yin said, they are here to propose marriage? Yi Xian was stunned, then said, propose marriage? What marriage? Guan Yin said in a deep voice, the Dao Tomb wants you to marry their goddess. Moreover, they want you to use the Dao scripture as a dowry. Yi Xian. P.S. One vote after another, when will there be a lot of votes? Chapter 1352. In the starry sky, Yi Xian's mind was in a mess. Marrying the Dao burial mound's goddess? Marry? Yi Xian looked at Guan Yin. Are you sure they used this word? Guan Yin nodded. Yi Xian softly said, this Dao burial mound is interesting. Guan Yin said, what do you think? Yi Xian said, let's go and meet them. The two left. Just as Yi Xian entered the sword hall, a strange voice suddenly came, worthy of being the master of the 5th dimension, putting on airs, making us wait for so long. Yi Xian looked over. The speaker was a young man wearing a brocade robe, holding a sword in his hand. Beside the man was an old man. The old man wore a plain robe and looked very scholarly. Dao Burial Mound. Yi Xian walked in front of the two. The old man stood up and cupped his fists towards Yi Xian. This old man is Zhu Jianshan, greeting young Master Yi. Yi Xian smiled. Old Zhu, please sit. Zhu Jianshan nodded. Young Master Yi, please. The two sat down. At this time, the young man suddenly sneered. Young Master Yi is really arrogant, making us wait for so long. Zhu Jianshan picked up the teacup beside him, not saying anything. Yi Xian looked at the young man. You are? The young man sneered. Dao Burial Mound, Helian Jian, the young generation's #1 swordsman. Yi Xian looked at Zhu Jianshan. The latter smiled bitterly. Young Master Yi, young Master Helian is also here under orders. Obviously, he couldn't do anything about it. Yi Xian smiled, then said, Previously, my friend told me that you want me to marry into the Dao Burial Mound, and that you want me to use the Dao scripture as dowry? Zhu Jianshan was about to speak when Helian Jian suddenly said, Do you have any questions? Yi Xian looked at He Lianjian and said with a smile, Shouldn't I have a problem? He Lianjian looked at Yi Xian. The reason why the five-dimensional universe is still alive is because my Dao tomb is restraining the doubting. If not for my Dao tomb, your five-dimensional universe would have long since disappeared. Saying this, he sneered. Do you really think that it was that Tendo from the fifth dimension who saved the fifth dimension? No, it was my Dao tomb that saved your five-dimensional universe. Zhu Jianshan frowned slightly, but he still didn't say anything, nor did he stop Helian Jian. Yi Xian suddenly looked at Zhu Jianshan, smiling but not speaking. He Lianjian frowned slightly when he saw this scene. What do you mean? Yi Xian laughed and said, Young Master Helian, why don't you go out and calm down? He Lianjian's eyes narrowed, his left hand tightly gripping the sword in his hand. Do you want to taste the sharpness of my sword? Yi Xian chuckled and said, Young Master Helian, I don't know who sent you here, but I know that the person who sent you definitely doesn't have good intentions. The other party knows that you don't have a brain, yet you are still arrogant. There is only one explanation for sending you here, and that is that they want me to kill you. I don't know if the other party simply wants me to kill you, or if they want me to have a conflict with the Dao tomb, or if they want you to become enemies with me, Yi Xian, or both. Saying this, he looked at Zhu Jianshan. Your Excellency, am I right? Zhu Jianshan gave Yi Xian a deep look, but didn't say anything. He Lianjian's expression became somewhat ugly. What do you mean? Yi Xian smiled and said, Think about it yourself. He Lianjian fell silent for a moment, and then he seemed to have thought of something, and his voice trembled as he said, No, she didn't mean that, she definitely didn't mean that. Yi Xian picked up the spirit tea at the side and took a light sip, and then he said, Young Master Helian, you can calm down and think about it. Since you were able to come this far, you definitely aren't a brainless person. Think about it carefully and you should be able to understand. He Lianjin gripped his sword tightly with his right hand while his expression was extremely unsightly. Could it be that the other party really wants me to die? Meanwhile, Yi Xian looked at Zhu Jianshan. Your Excellency, let's get down to business. Zhu Jianshan spoke in a light voice. Hearing about her isn't as good as seeing her in person. Yi Xian smiled and said, My older sister told me that I have to think about everything I do in the future. She said that it's never wrong to be cautious. Of course, the most important thing is that she's gone now. I can't be willful anymore. I don't have the qualifications to be willful anymore. Zhu Jianshan spoke in a light voice. Miss Mu is an extraordinary person. As he spoke, he looked at Yi Xian. Young Master Yi, I'll get straight to the point. We want to form a marriage alliance with young Master Yi. Yi Xian said, You want the Dao scripture. Zhu Jianshan said, Everyone can accept the idea of a marriage alliance. What do you think? Yi Xian asked with a smile, What if I don't agree? Zhu Jianshan said calmly, White Emperor Star Monarch has already arrived at the Heaven Realm Abyss, so we have a temporary truce. Whether we fight or not, the initiative lies in the hands of my Dao tomb. As he spoke, he looked at Yi Xian, or should I say, in the hands of young Master Yi. Yi Xian was silent. Zhu Jianxin slowly drank his tea, not in a hurry. As for He Lianjian, he was still pondering, but his expression was becoming more and more unsightly. He was almost blocked by someone else. How could his expression be good? At this time, Yi Xian suddenly said, "Who is that goddess?" Zhu Jianxin said, "Lord's adopted daughter, and also the current leader of my Dao tomb. This time I came under her orders." Yi Xian said with a smile, "She asked you to propose for me to marry her?" Zhu Jianxin nodded, "Yes." Yi Xian chuckled, "This is interesting. A conspiracy." He smelled a conspiracy. His intuition told him that the other party did not only want the Dao scripture, but also wanted something else. What was it? After thinking for a long time, Yi Xian could not think of anything else besides the Dao scripture that was worth the other party's attention. Could it be that the other party coveted his beauty? And that must be it. At this time, Zhu Jianxin suddenly said, "Young Master Yi, what do you think?" Yi Xian retracted his thoughts and asked, "What else did she say?" Zhu Jianxin said, "The goddess said that we can't force young Master Yi. If young Master Yi doesn't agree, it doesn't matter, we are still friends." Yi Xian said, "But you will make a temporary truce with the doubting, right?" Zhu Jianxin nodded. Yi Xian was silent. Zhu Jianxin continued, "The goddess also said that White Emperor Xingjuan praised young Master Yi to the point where he almost said that young Master Yi is the #1 evildoer since ancient times. Now, the doubting places great importance on young Master Yi, very, very great importance." White Emperor Xingjuan. Yi Xian was silent. He should have killed this old man back then, but he had no choice. Although that old man did not know how to fight, his escaping skills were too good. Zhu Jianxin continued to drink his tea. He was not anxious at all. Right now, the initiative was in the hands of the Dao tomb. The one who should be anxious was Yi Xian. Because once the Dao tomb retreated, the doubting would definitely destroy the fifth dimension at all costs. What Yi Xian had done in the doubting was a great humiliation to the entire doubting. Not only had he slaughtered the doubting, but he had also tricked the doubting's spirit vein. Not only did he kill people, but he also destroyed their hearts. Right at this moment, Yi Xian suddenly said, "Your Excellency, may I ask if your divine daughter wants the Dao scripture, or is it that her true objective is actually to kill me?" Zhu Jianxin almost spat out the tea in his mouth. Although he didn't, he still choked. Zhu Jianxin looked at Yi Xian with a strange expression. "Young Master Yi, this old man doesn't know how to answer you." Yi Xian was speechless. Zhu Jianxin put down the teacup and said, "Young Master Yi, have you considered it?" Yi Xian smiled and said, "I'll go with you to the Dao tomb." Zhu Jianxin was stunned. Yi Xian chuckled and said, "Talking about marriage naturally requires two people to meet and discuss it. What do you think?" Zhu Jianxin hesitated and said, "You want to go to the Dao tomb?" Yi Xian nodded, "Yes. Also, I will bring the Dao scripture with me." Zhu Jianxin looked at Yi Xian, "Do you want to leave now?" Yi Xian said, "Give me half a day, is that okay?" Zhu Jianxin nodded, "Okay." Yi Xian got up and left. At this moment, Helian Jian suddenly said, "You are a swordsman." Yi Xian looked at Helian Jian, and Helian Jian looked at Yi Xian. "Please enlighten me." Yi Xian suddenly disappeared. The next moment, a sword was pressed against Helian Jian's eyebrows, and Helian Jian was petrified on the spot. Yi Xian put away his sword and smiled, "Young Master Helian, let's have a good spar another day." After saying that, he turned and left. In the same place, Helian Jian said with a trembling voice, "He is so strong." Thinking of this, he looked at Zhu Jianxin. "I treated him like that before, why didn't he kill me?" Zhu Jianxin said softly, "Because young Master Yi is a smart person, a really smart person." Helian Jian was silent. Inside the hall, Guan Yin said in a deep voice, "Do you really want to go to the Dao tomb?" Yi Xian nodded, "I must go. If I don't go, the Dao tomb will stop, and I will fight to the death with the doubting." Guan Yin said, "That woman proposed to marry you, her goal can't just be the Dao scripture, right?" Yi Xian said softly, "There must be another goal, but I still haven't figured out what it is. However, as long as I go to the Dao tomb, I will definitely find out. Guan Yin asked, will it be dangerous? Yixian shook his head, everything is unknown. He remembered Mu Niannian said that the Dao tomb cannot be trusted, and the people there, in a way, are more terrifying than the doubting. Guan Yin hesitated, then said, can't I not go? Yixian said softly, the doubting and the Dao tomb are both things I have to face. Don't worry, I may not be able to gain an advantage, but I will definitely not suffer a loss. Guan Yin was puzzled, why? Yixian patted his face lightly, because I am shameless. How can a shameless person suffer a loss? Guan Yin was speechless. After settling the matter, Yixian followed Zhu Jianxin and Yi Xian to the Dao tomb. This time, he brought Yi Zhiming. In the Dao tomb, on the peak of a mountain, a woman stood on an ancient tree. The woman wore a snow-white dress, her hands behind her back, and there was a heroic spirit between her brows. At this time, the woman suddenly smiled. Come to the Dao tomb? Fix. Chapter 1353. Within the Dao tomb. Along the way, Yi Zhiming explained the Dao tomb to Yi Xian. The Dao tomb was a place where some Dao breakers gathered. The purpose of these Dao breakers gathering was simple, to fight against doubting. In the past, their goal had been very simple. They had only wanted to fight against the doubting. But now, these Dao breakers had become a force. Their goal wasn't just to destroy the doubting. As for the specific strength of the Dao tomb, Yi Zhiming did not know. However, if the Dao tomb could contend with the doubting, then its strength was definitely not weaker than the doubting. Along the way, He Lianjian also became more low-key, and when he conversed with Yi Xian, he was sufficiently courteous. Power. In any place, only those with strength would be respected. He Lianjian wasn't stupid. If he still wanted to find trouble with Yi Xian at this time, then he couldn't be called stupid, because that was an insult to the word stupid. Along the way, Zhu Jianxin rarely spoke. After an unknown period of time, the three of them arrived at a starry sky. After passing through nearly a dozen spatial black holes, they finally arrived at the Dao tomb. The Dao tomb was not mysterious at all. It was just a mountain range, and in the middle of the mountain range, there was a huge mountain called the Dao Tomb Mountain. This Dao Tomb Mountain was the base of the Dao tomb. Yi Xian sensed many powerful auras as soon as he entered the Tomb of the Way. There was no lack of Dao Defense Realm cultivators among them. Of course, in this place, it should be called the Dao Breaking Realm. In doubting, above Dao Corroboration was Dao Defense, and in the Dao Tomb, above Dao Corroboration was Dao Breaking. Two completely different paths of cultivation. Yi Xian looked around and sensed the powerful auras around him. He knew that he still had a long way to go in the fifth dimension. There were many self-release realm experts in the fifth dimension, but there were too few Dao verification and Dao controlling realm experts. The experts of these two realms could not be compared to the Dao tomb and doubting. As for achieving the Dao above the Imperial Dao and Dao breaking Dao, there was not a single one in the fifth dimension. Meanwhile, Zhu Jianxin suddenly said, our people are at the celestial abyss right now. Yi Xian glanced at Zhu Jianxin. He naturally understood Zhu Jianxin's meaning. Zhu Jianxin was telling him that the Dao tomb was very powerful, very powerful. Yi Xian smiled and said nothing. At this moment, a powerful aura suddenly came from the horizon. Yi Xian looked up and saw a white-robed man appear above them. Beside Yi Xian, He Lianjian said in a low voice, Brother Yi, this person is called by Shu Jing, and he's one of the goddess's admirers. He's here to cause trouble. Yi Xian looked at He Lianjian. Brother He Lian, what do you think I should do? He Lianjian thought for a moment and said, Brother Yi, the strong are respected here, so you absolutely can't be afraid. If he dares to provoke you, then beat him up. Otherwise, everyone here will think that you're easy to bully, and all of them will come to bully you. At that time, you'll be in endless trouble. Yi Xian cupped his fists. I've benefited from your advice. At this time, Bai Shujing's gaze suddenly fell on Yi Xian. You're Yi Xian? Yi Xian nodded. That's me. Bai Shujing sneered. Why don't you take a piss and look at yourself? Are you worthy of the Dao Tomb's goddess? Yi Xian smiled. If I'm not wrong, you should like the goddess, but the goddess doesn't like you. So, when you heard that the goddess likes me, Yi Xian, you became jealous and came to cause trouble for me, right? Bai Shujing was so angry that he started laughing. The goddess likes you? Are you joking? Yi Xian looked at Zhu Jianshan. Senior Zhu, did the goddess ask you to go to the 5th dimension to propose marriage? Zhu Jianshan nodded. Yi Xian looked at Bai Shujing and spread his hands. You see, because I'm too outstanding, your goddess admires me. So, she couldn't help but go to the 5th dimension to propose marriage. Zhu Jianshan hesitated for a moment before saying, Young Master Yi, the goddess. Yi Xian blinked. Could it be that she doesn't admire me? Is it because of something else? Zhu Jianshan was speechless. The goddess's goal was naturally for the Tao scripture, but it wasn't good to say this out loud. Yi Xian sighed in a low voice. Sigh, actually, I'm also very troubled. She's too outstanding. I tried to change this shortcoming for a long time, but I still couldn't get rid of it. Zhu Jianshan's mouth twitched. Was this guy's skin made of iron? He Lianjian, who was at the side, was also dumbfounded. Wasn't Yi Xian a little too thick-skinned? At this time, Bai Shujing suddenly said angrily, Do you still want face? Yi Xian glanced at Bai Shujing. Do you like the goddess? Bai Shujing was speechless, not knowing how to reply. Yi Xian said with a smile, You like the goddess, but don't dare to say it. Why don't you dare to say it? Because you feel inferior. Think about it, your goddess is so outstanding, so would she like someone with an inferiority complex? Bai Shujing's expression was extremely unsightly. Yi Xian continued, I can see that you've reached the true self-release realm, so your mental state shouldn't be so bad. Why don't you even have the courage to admit it? Loving a woman isn't something that can't be seen in the light. Why should you feel inferior? If your strength isn't enough, and you feel that you aren't worthy of her, then work hard to increase your strength. Tell me, do you think there's any meaning in making trouble for me? Or would your goddess be grateful to you for making trouble for me? No, she would only look down on you even more. In the sky, Bai Shujing's expression became even more unsightly. It was as if he'd choked on 5 kilograms of dung. At this time, Yi Xian continued, If you were a woman, would you like a man who doesn't even have the courage to admit it? As he spoke, he gazed at Helian Jian. Do you think what I said makes sense? Helian Jian hesitated for a moment, and then he said, It does make sense. Yi Xian gazed at Bai Shujing. Think about it, if you were at the legendary Tao control realm right now, the number 1 genius of the Tao tomb, at that time, would you still feel that you aren't worthy of the goddess? Bai Shujing clenched his fists tightly as he gazed at Yi Xian, and it was unknown what he was thinking. Yi Xian sighed softly. Young man, as someone who's experienced it, I'll teach you a few moves. There are only 2 ways to deal with women. The first is to possess formidable strength and subdue her. The second is to use shamelessness to pursue her. Helian Jian suddenly said in a light voice, Brother Yi, can shamelessness really work? Yi Xian smiled and said, A brave woman is afraid of a clingy man. So long as your skin is thick enough, then there's no woman you can't conquer. Helian Jian glanced at Yi Xian, and he muttered in his heart, Is this fellow really a swordsman? Zhu Jianshan glanced at Yi Xian, and he sighed softly. This fellow is too outrageous. Can the goddess deal with this fellow? Don't suffer a double loss when the time comes. Actually, he was really quite worried right now. Not only was this young Master Ye's strength formidable, his ability to deceive others was also rare in the world. Most importantly, this young Master Yi was truly shameless. Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly said, Senior Zhu, let's go see the goddess. Zhu Jianshan hesitated for a moment, and then he said, Young Master Yi, please be more composed and don't be rude when you meet the goddess. Yi Xian smiled and said, Don't worry, I won't act rashly. I, Yi Xian, am a pure person. Under normal circumstances, I wouldn't casually enter into relationships with women. Helian Jian was speechless. Zhu Jianshan's face twitched. Young Master Yi, that's not what I meant. Yi Xian blinked. Then what do you mean, senior? Zhu Jianshan hesitated for a moment, and then he said, Let's go see the goddess. After he finished speaking, he turned around and left. He was a little afraid of this young Master Yi. It was truly a headache. Yi Xian followed him. Heli and Jian glanced at Bai Shujing in the distance. Bai Shujing was still silent, and he seemed to be thinking about something. Heli and Jian patted his face and said softly, "Is being shameless really useful?" In the distance, Yi Xian was constantly sizing up his surroundings. During this time, powerful divine senses swept over him from time to time, but he didn't resist them. Those divine senses were unable to invade his body at all. Zhu Jianshan didn't speak along the way, and whenever someone came to look for Yi Xian, he would beat them away. He finally understood what was going on. Not many of the younger generation in the Dao tomb were a match for Yi Xian, and those who came to look for Yi Xian were asking to be humiliated. Soon, the two of them arrived at a large hall. At this time, Zhu Jianshan turned to look at Yi Xian. "Young Master Yi, the goddess is currently discussing something with the others. Please wait for a moment." Yi Xian nodded. "All right." Zhu Jianshan nodded slightly, and then he stood to the side and closed his eyes to rest. Yi Xian looked around, and then he slowly closed his eyes. At this time, Yi Jiming's voice suddenly sounded in his mind. "There is also a Dao scripture in this Dao tomb." Yi Xian asked, "Can you sense the whereabouts of that Dao scripture?" Yi Jiming said in a low voice, "I can only sense its aura, but not its exact location." Yi Xian fell silent. At this time, Yi Jiming suddenly said, "How many women have you pursued?" Yi Xian was slightly taken aback. Yi Jiming asked again, "How many women has your shamelessness pursued?" Yi Xian smiled awkwardly. "I was just joking." Yi Jiming sneered. "Joking? I was wondering why you have so many women around you. So it's because you're shameless." Yi Xian. At this time, Zhu Jianshan suddenly said, "Young Master Yi, the goddess wants to see you." Yi Xian collected his thoughts and looked at Zhu Jianshan. "Let's go." Zhu Jianshan nodded. After the two of them entered the hall, Yi Xian saw a woman in a white dress. Her long hair draped over her shoulders, and there was a purple ribbon wrapped around her forehead. The goddess. In terms of appearance, the goddess was also extremely beautiful. She was one of the rarest women in the world. And the faint smile on the goddess' face told Yi Xian that she was not easy to deal with. Inside the hall, there were also some experts from the Dao tomb. At this time, everyone was looking at Yi Xian. This was the person who single-handedly killed his way to the doubting and doubting. The goddess was also sizing up Yi Xian. She knew Yi Xian like the back of her hand. At this time, Yi Xian suddenly said, "When are we getting married?" Everyone, the goddess's lips curled up. Everyone, Yi Xian. P.S. When can you guys vote? Readers, now. Climbs. Chapter 1354. I can do it now. In the square, the experts of the Dao tomb looked at the goddess, wanting to say something but hesitating. Yi Xian was silent. What is this woman trying to do? Could it be that she has taken a fancy to my beauty? Thinking of this, Yi Xian couldn't help but touch his face, sighing in his heart. Being handsome is also a kind of trouble. At this time, the goddess suddenly said, "You can leave. I want to talk to young Master Yi alone." Inside the hall, the experts of the Dao tomb retreated. The goddess walked in front of Yi Xian, carefully looked at Yi Xian, then smiled and said, "Young Master Yi, let's go for a walk?" Yi Xian nodded, "Okay." The two left the hall and walked towards the distant back mountain. During this time, people would look at the two from time to time. At this time, the goddess gently brushed her hair behind her ear, smiled and said, "Young Master Yi, doubting and the Dao tomb will have a temporary truce." Saying this, she looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian's expression was calm. Doubting must have made some concessions. The goddess smiled and said, "Several top-quality mineral veins." Yi Xian was a little curious. "Miss Goddess," the goddess suddenly said, "just call me Banji." "Banji?" Yi Xian looked at the goddess. The goddess nodded. "Li Banji, my surname is Li." Yi Xian smiled and said, "Miss Banji, is this heaven realm abyss important to the Dao tomb and doubting?" Li Banji nodded, very important. It is a place that both sides must fight for. Yixian asked, why? Li Banji smiled and said, because it is rich in fortune crystal. Young Master Yi might not know what fortune crystal is, but if the fifth dimension wants to continue to grow, fortune crystal is a must. Yixian was puzzled. What do you mean? Li Banji said, after one attains the Dao realm, one must possess a single thing to charge into the Dao defense or Dao breaking realm, and that's spirit energy. However, ordinary spirit energy is useless to Dao proving realm experts. Only the divine fortune crystal can help Dao proving realm experts advance to the next level. Then, she looked at Yixian and said with a smile, on average, tens of thousands of fortune divine crystals can create a Dao defense or Dao breaking realm expert. Yixian frowned slightly. As long as I have this fortune divine crystal, I can reach imperial Dao? Li Banji shook his head and smiled. That's not it. Only those who fulfilled the conditions, in other words, those whose cultivation had reached the limit and whose mental state was sufficient, could reach the next level after consuming the fortune divine crystal. But without the fortune divine crystal, no matter how hard they cultivate, it's impossible for them to reach the next level. Without the support of powerful spiritual energy, it's like a housewife can't cook a meal without rice. Yixian nodded. I understand. Li Banji continued. Before this, the heaven realm abyss has always been controlled by the doubting. Therefore, the doubting has an extremely large number of Dao defense experts, and they're all very strong. But now, they're willing to give up some supreme-grade mineral veins to the Dao tomb. Then she looked at Yixian. It's obvious that they want to kill me first. Yixian said with a smile, what happens after you kill me? Li Banji smiled. We'll continue to fight and fight for the heaven realm abyss. Yixian said softly, let me guess. You know that the truce in the heaven realm abyss is actually a delaying tactic. The doubting wants to get rid of me now, and after they get rid of me, the doubting will continue to target the Dao tomb. You sent people to the fifth dimension to find me because you want to join forces with me. Yes, the current situation is advantageous to you, because it's up to you whether you want to continue fighting or not, and you can decide the fate of the fifth dimension with a single thought. I have to give you enough benefits, and this benefit must satisfy you. Only then will you continue to fight with the doubting. And the only thing on me that can move you is the Dao scripture. Li Banji looked at Yixian. Young Master Yi is smart, but young Master Yi is wrong about one thing. The thing that moves me is not only the Dao scripture. Yixian looked at Li Banji. Is there anything else? The corner of Li Banji's mouth raised slightly. The forces behind young Master Yi. Yixian was silent. Li Banji chuckled. Young Master Yi is not alone. As far as I know, behind young Master Yi, there is not only the Tendo of the fifth dimension, but there are also some relatively mysterious powerhouses. For example, that plain-dressed woman. Yixian said softly, it seems that Miss Banji has investigated me very clearly. Li Banji nodded and smiled. Young Master Yi, I have no ill intentions. As for the choice, my Dao tomb will not force young Master Yi. Yixian looked at Li Banji. There is one thing I don't understand. Why does Miss Banji want to marry me? For a marriage alliance? Li Banji blinked. Am I not worthy of young Master Yi? Yixian said, you know that's not what I mean. Li Banji chuckled. There are two reasons. First, I don't want to be enemies with young Master Yi. However, not everyone in the Dao tomb thinks so. After all, the Dao scriptures on young Master Yi are too tempting. Moreover, as far as we know, young Master Yi has a God seal. To a certain extent, young Master Yi is the guardian of the great Dao. As for us in the Dao tomb, we are all Dao breakers. However, if I get married, some people in the Dao tomb will shut up. Second, I have a selfish motive. The Dao tomb is not much different from the forces in the secular world. There are also small groups. My identity is special. Whoever marries me, young Master Yi should understand. Yixian said with a smile, a shield. Li Banji smiled. Yixian was silent. Li Banji suddenly stopped. She looked at the horizon and smiled. Young Master Yi, you can make a decision now. It's not that I want to force young Master Yi, but Uncle Raho from the abyss of 2 worlds is waiting for my answer. Yi Xian looked at the horizon from the peak of the mountain. No one knew what he was thinking. Li Banji held her hands behind her back. Her hair fluttered in the mountain breeze. It was a beautiful sight. Yi Xian suddenly smiled. Actually, the Dao Tomb will not stop fighting regardless of whether I agree or not. Li Banji's right hand unconsciously clenched tightly when she heard this. Yi Xian looked at Li Banji. Miss Banji, my sister Nian has heavily injured the Dao ancestor. The Dao Tomb could be said to be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. If the Dao Tomb stops now, it's equivalent to giving doubting a chance. Miss Banji is so smart. She definitely wouldn't do such a thing. Li Banji smiled. Young Master Yi is amazing. You've seen things so clearly. However, young Master Yi seems to have overlooked one thing. Doubting wants to kill even more now. If I stop fighting and let Doubting and young Master Yi fight to the death, then my Dao Tomb will reap the benefits. Isn't that better? Yi Xian nodded. Miss Banji can do that. However, Miss has a better choice. That is to join hands with my 5th dimension. Li Banji said softly, Young Master Yi, forgive me for being blunt. The current 5th dimension is of little help to my Dao Tomb. Yi Xian suddenly pointed at himself. What about me? Li Banji looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian said, Miss Banji, what do you think of me? Li Banji looked at Yi Xian and blinked. What do you want to say? Yi Xian said seriously, Miss Banji, do you think I'm more important or the Dao scripture? Li Banji thought about it and said, Young Master Yi, this question, Yi Xian said seriously, Miss Banji, why did you only see the Dao scripture and not me? Could it be that my future achievements are inferior to a few Dao scriptures? Li Banji looked at Yi Xian and didn't say anything. Yi Xian continued, Miss Banji, the Dao scripture is dead, but people are alive. Why choose a Dao scripture and not a person? Li Banji smiled. Young Master Ye's words are not without reason. However, young Master Yi, have you ever thought that if I obtain the Dao scripture, it will be used by me? But will young Master Yi be willing to use it for me? Yi Xian shook his head. Miss Banji, why do you think this way? Think about it from another angle. We both have the same goal, and that is to destroy doubting. Since we have the same goal, why not cooperate? Since Miss can say so much calmly, you should have a good impression of me. Good impression? Li Banji suddenly interrupted Yi Xian's words. Young Master Yi, sorry to interrupt, but this good impression, Yi Xian sternly said, Miss Banji, you don't have a good impression of me? Li Banji was silent. She had to admit that this was the first time she met someone like Yi Xian. How could she answer him? Yi Xian continued, Miss Banji, if you want to see the Dao scripture, I can show it to you. Li Banji looked at Yi Xian. Really? Yi Xian nodded. Really? As he said that, he took out 5 Dao scriptures and placed them in front of Li Banji. Li Banji didn't receive the Dao scripture, but just looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian smiled. Miss, are you afraid that I am cheating? Li Banji shook her head and said softly, Young Master Yi is indeed extraordinary. I already knew about the matter of you sharing the Dao scripture in the 5th dimension. To be honest, in my opinion, this is an incredible thing. However, young Master Yi did it. As she said that, she pushed the 5 Dao scriptures in front of Yi Xian. Young Master Yi, I, Li Banji, am willing to teach this friend. As I said, compared to the Dao scripture, this person is more valuable. Yi Xian said with a smile, Is this a test? Li Banji shook her head and smiled. Young Master Yi, I can tell you clearly that before we came, our goal was the Dao scripture. However, after meeting young Master Yi, I changed my mind. The Dao scripture is not important. As she said that, she looked at the sky and smiled. Young Master Yi, we will get married tonight. Yi Xian was stunned. Li Banji looked at Yi Xian and smiled. Although I value young Master Yi more, not everyone in the Dao Tomb thinks so. If I get married, everyone will shut up. What do you think? Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes. At this time, Yi Jiming's voice suddenly sounded. This woman's goal is not simple. Yi Xian said softly in his heart, "Don't worry, other than Sister Nian, no one can scheme against me." As he said that, he opened his eyes and looked at Li Banji. "Alright, let's get married." Yi Jiming suddenly said, "Are you really going to marry her?" Yi Xian said in his heart, "Either she sleeps with me, or I sleep with her. Who's afraid of who?" Yi Jiming. Chapter 1355. Marriage. Li Banji did not lie. The land of Dao Tum quickly began to hold their wedding. Li Banji stood quietly on top of the mountain. Next to Li Banji was Zhu Jianshan, who had gone to the fifth dimension to pick up Yi Xian. After a long time, Li Banji suddenly said, "How is it?" Zhu Jianshan said softly, "A genius is rare in the world. Most importantly, this person is meticulous, black-bellied, and does not stick to one pattern." He paused and then continued, "Girl, this person is not easy to deal with." Li Banji nodded. "Indeed." Then she opened her palm. Suddenly, many tiny red blood vessels appeared on her palm. Li Banji said softly, "Uncle Zhu, under normal circumstances, how long will it take for me to reach Dao completion?" Dao Ting above Dao confirmation was Imperial Dao, while the land of Dao Tum was Dao breaking. However, above Dao breaking, the land of Dao Tum was also Dao completion. After all, no Dao breaker had ever walked a new path. Therefore, even Dao breakers would eventually return to the realm of the Daoist canon. This was why the land of Dao Tum cared so much about Dao canon. Zhu Jianshan said after a moment of silence, "At least 30 years. 30 years. Li Banji shook her head. "That's too long." Zhu Jianshan sighed. "There's no rush. Dao completion. Even in the land of Dao Tum, there were only 2 of them." Li Banji suddenly smiled. "Uncle Zhu, what if my devouring bloodline evolves again?" Hearing this, Zhu Jianshan's pupils suddenly shrank. He looked at Li Banji. "Your real goal is his bloodline." Devouring bloodline. Li Banji's bloodline was very special. It had the power of devouring. In other words, it could devour other people's bloodline to improve itself. Li Banji softly said, "The power of his bloodline is the strongest I've seen apart from my devouring bloodline. If I can devour his bloodline, I'll definitely be able to improve once again. Moreover, once I marry him, if he's not around, the 5th dimension and the Dao scripture will naturally fall into the hands of the Dao Tum. 3 birds with 1 stone." Zhu Jianshan said solemnly, "Girl, this person is not simple. You must think carefully." Li Banji slowly closed her eyes. "It's worth the risk." Zhu Jianshan was silent. Li Banji smiled and said, "Uncle Zhu, let's go prepare for the wedding." Zhu Jianshan wanted to say something but hesitated. Li Banji smiled and said, "Go." Seeing that Li Ban had already made up his mind, Zhu Jianshan did not say anything else and turned around to leave. On the mountain peak, Li Banji slowly closed her eyes. At this moment, all the blood in her body gradually trembled. In fact, as soon as she saw Yi Xian, her blood had been boiling. That was excitement and thrill. The devouring bloodline loved powerful bloodlines the most, and it was obvious that Yi Xian's bloodline power was very powerful. After a long time, Li Banji suddenly opened her eyes and smiled. "You are an interesting person. I also want to be friends with you. Unfortunately, I want the power of your bloodline even more." In the room, Yi Xian sat cross-legged on the ground. In front of him was the soul-suppressing sword. The soul-suppressing sword had absorbed all the souls in the underworld. The current soul-suppressing sword was at the peak of the Dao Imperial Realm. If Yi Xian's soul-fixation sword was added, even some Dao Imperial Realm powerhouses would find it difficult to resist. As for those below the Dao Imperial Realm, basically no one was a match for him. And now, he was at the Dao Validation Realm. However, his combat strength was far beyond the Dao Validation Realm. He had 3 strongest trump cards. The first was the soul-suppressing sword. With this sword and him, even among the Dao Imperial Realm, there were few who could be a match for him. The second was the Dao scripture martial arts, Dao fist, and death-seeking. Especially the Dao fist. The power of this fist was not something an ordinary Dao Imperial Realm powerhouse could withstand. The last one was his bloodline power. The power of his bloodline was the most terrifying of his 3 trump cards. Once the bloodline power was activated, he would enter a state of madness. In this state, his combat strength would increase without limit until he died in battle. In fact, he did not know much about this bloodline power. What kind of bloodline was it? Or in other words, how strong was this bloodline? Apart from that, there was another one, and that was the slaughter domain that he had previously comprehended. His way of proving his Dao was to prove his Dao by killing. To a certain extent, his killing intent had already surpassed the sword Dao. His current strength was far beyond the ordinary Dao Imperial Realm. However, this was far from enough. Not to mention anything else, even if he used all his trump cards, he would definitely not be able to defeat that Dao ancestor, not to mention that there were so many Dao Imperial Realm powerhouses. Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes. Dao scripture. He had to find all the Dao scriptures. At this moment, there was a sudden knock on the door. Yi Xian collected his thoughts and got up to open the door. Outside the door stood a man. It was Helian Jian. Yi Xian smiled. Brother Helian. Helian Jian smiled faintly. Brother Yi, congratulations. Yi Xian chuckled. Brother Helian, you didn't come here just to congratulate me, did you? Helian Jian nodded. Brother Yi, I heard that Tu Ming came back from the heaven abyss. Yi Xian said softly, Banji's pursuer? Helian Jian nodded. Yes. Brother Yi, this person is not simple. He is known as the second person of the younger generation in the Dao tomb. His strength is only second to the goddess, and he is the number 1 pursuer of the goddess. Most importantly, he has the Tu family behind him. The Tu family has great influence in the Dao tomb, and they have always wanted the goddess to marry Tu Ming. So this time, Tu Ming did not come with good intentions. Yi Xian nodded slightly. I understand. Helian Jian said in a deep voice. Brother Yi, the waters of the Dao tomb are very deep. You must be careful. Yi Xian smiled. Thank you for telling me. Helian Jian shook his head. I should be the one thanking you. Someone asked me to follow Zhu Jianshan to the 5th dimension to find him. In fact, they wanted to kill me with a borrowed knife. If you had not shown mercy, I would have died. Not only would I have died, but I might have died without knowing why. Saying this, he suddenly bowed respectfully to Yi Xian. Thank you, Brother Yi, for not killing me that day. After getting to know Yi Xian, he realized how terrifying Yi Xian's strength was. Because of this, he was grateful to Yi Xian. Because not only did Yi Xian not kill him, but he also reminded him. Yi Xian smiled. Brother Helian, do you know who wants you dead? Helian Jian nodded. I know. Saying this, he shook his head with a bitter smile. What can I do? They did not force me to go. Yi Xian patted Helian Jian's shoulder. It's okay, there will be opportunities for revenge. Helian Jian nodded. I understand. At this time, a woman suddenly appeared. The woman was holding a groom's clothes. She glanced at Yi Xian. Young Master Yi, it's time to get married. Yi Xian burst out laughing. We are married. Saying this, he waved his right hand and the groom's clothes appeared in his hand. Get married. Inside the Dao Tomb Palace. At this time, many experts of the Dao Tomb Palace had gathered. At this moment, these experts all had a strange expression. Get married. This goddess and Yi Xian got married just because they said they wanted to. The two of them had just met. When Yi Xian entered the main hall, Li Banji was already waiting. At this time, Li Banji was wearing a red wedding robe. However, she did not cover her head with a red veil. Because of this, her peerless appearance was unreservedly displayed in front of everyone's eyes. It had to be said that Li Banji was very beautiful. Li Banji looked at Yi Xian and smiled. Let's begin. Yi Xian smiled. Then let's begin. As he said this, he walked to Li Banji's side and directly took her hand. Li Banji's expression fluctuated a little, but she quickly calmed down. She did not withdraw her hand. Yi Xian took Li Banji's hand and walked to a place not far away. Only a bastard would not take advantage of an opportunity. After 3 bows, Yi Xian and Li Banji directly went to the bridal chamber, leaving behind the experts of the Dao Tomb Palace in a mess. The location of the bridal chamber was beyond Yi Xian's expectation, because it was in a basement, a very deep basement. Yi Xian looked around. The surroundings were sealed. There was only a bed and a few simple wooden tables. Li Banji smiled. This is where I usually cultivate. It's a little crude. You don't mind, do you? Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. I don't mind. As he said this, he sat on the bed. He looked at Li Banji. Miss Banji, isn't it a fake marriage? Li Banji smiled. It's a fake marriage. However, we have to put on a good show. What do you think? Yi Xian nodded. That's true. As he said this, he sat on a chair and said, Miss Banji, you can sleep on the bed. Li Banji sat on the bed. She looked at Yi Xian and smiled. You come over too. Yi Xian smiled. That's not very good, is it? Li Banji blinked. She was a little playful. But, are you afraid that I'll eat you? Yi Xian smiled. He walked to the bed and sat next to Li Banji. At this moment, Li Banji suddenly pulled Yi Xian's hand. Yi Xian glanced at Li Banji and did not resist. Li Banji smiled. I've investigated young Master Yi. To be honest, I have some admiration for young Master Yi, especially for young Master Ye's character. Young Master Yi values friendship and righteousness. He treats the Tao scriptures like dirt. As she said this, she shook her head and smiled. Just this point alone, there are very few men in the world who can compare to young Master Yi. Yi Xian looked at Li Banji. He smiled. Miss Banji, do you really admire me? Li Banji blinked. Not really. However, I do have a good impression of you. Yi Xian smiled. Miss Banji, we're friends now, right? Li Banji nodded. As she said this, she looked at Yi Xian. Since we're friends, I'd like to borrow something from you. Yi Xian asked with a smile. What is it? Although he was smiling, inside the prison pagoda, the soul-suppressing sword was ready to go. Li Banji's lips suddenly curled up. I want to borrow young Master Ye's blood. As soon as she said this, a mysterious force suddenly enveloped Yi Xian. In an instant, countless blood-red ropes appeared all over Yi Xian's body. These ropes bound Yi Xian tightly. Yi Xian looked at Li Banji. His expression was calm. Miss Banji, what are you trying to do? Do you want to play with special spirits? Li Banji smiled. To tell you the truth, I want to devour young Master Ye's blood. Hearing this, Yi Xian was stunned. The next moment, the soul-suppressing sword in his body suddenly calmed down. Yi Xian looked at Li Banji. This woman wants to fight with me? Or is she going to fight with her father? However, Yi Xian was still a little apprehensive. Is my father reliable? If he's not, then I can't beat him. P.S. There are very few tickets recently. I'm very unhappy. Don't force me to release chapters. When I release chapters, even I'm afraid of myself. Chapter 1356. It had to be said that Yi Xian was a little confused at this moment. He knew that the woman in front of him must have a purpose, but he did not expect that she wanted to devour his blood. Bloodline power. Yi Xian, who was about to attack, stopped. Although his body was locked by a mysterious force, he was confident that he could destroy this mysterious force. Whether it was doubting or the Dao Tomb, they had underestimated his strength. However, he did not choose to attack. He was very confident in the power of his bloodline. Devour my blood? He wanted to see if Li Banji's bloodline power was stronger, or if his bloodline power was stronger. Although he was confident in his bloodline power, the soul-suppressing sword in his body was still ready to attack at any time. In front of Yi Xian, Li Banji suddenly said, You are very calm. Yi Xian looked at Li Banji and smiled. Miss Banji, I thought you were different from others, but unfortunately, you still chose the benefits in front of you. Li Banji smiled. If it wasn't for your special bloodline, I would choose to be friends with you, but unfortunately, Saying that, she shook her head and smiled. Do you have any last words? Yi Xian was silent. Li Banji smiled. If you don't say anything, then there's nothing. Saying that, she suddenly pressed her right hand on Yi Xian's shoulder. In an instant, the blood in Yi Xian's body began to tremble. At this moment, Li Banji suddenly became excited. I can feel that your bloodline power is extremely powerful. If my devouring bloodline devours your bloodline power, it will definitely be able to reach a higher level. Saying that, she suddenly raised her right hand. In an instant, a stream of blood suddenly rushed out of Yi Xian's body. This stream of blood directly entered her body through Li Banji's right hand. Boom! In an instant, Li Banji's body turned blood red. Li Banji slowly closed her eyes and said excitedly, "What a powerful bloodline power, good." Saying that, she suddenly opened her eyes. What's going on? Yi Xian looked at Li Banji without saying a word. Li Banji said in horror, "No. Impossible. Absolutely impossible." In her body, Yi Xian's blood was devouring her bloodline. Yi Xian's bloodline was going to take over? Li Banji hurriedly circulated her bloodline power, wanting to suppress Yi Xian's bloodline. However, she was horrified to find that her bloodline power could not suppress Yi Xian's bloodline at all. Yi Xian's bloodline was frantically devouring her bloodline. At this moment, Li Banji was really panicking. Seeming to have thought of something, Li Banji suddenly looked at Yi Xian and said with astonishment, "You can control that blood." Yi Xian nodded. Li Banji stared at Yi Xian. "Stop your bloodline power." A ray of sword light suddenly flew out from Yi Xian's body. The next moment, all the red threads that locked him disappeared without a trace. Yi Xian looked at Li Banji and said with a smile, "Miss Li, was it fun?" Li Banji said in a deep voice, "I underestimated you. I should say, I underestimated your bloodline power." Yi Xian nodded, "Yes." Li Banji looked at Yi Xian and suddenly smiled, "Let's cooperate, just like what we said before." Yi Xian shook his head and smiled, "Sorry, I don't want to cooperate with you anymore." Li Banji looked calm. "It doesn't matter if you don't want to cooperate. Young Master Yi can leave." Yi Xian looked at Li Banji and did not say anything. Li Banji raised the corner of her mouth. "Young Master Yi, don't tell me you want to kill me?" Yi Xian nodded. "That's what I thought." Li Banji looked at Yi Xian with a calm expression. "You won't do that. You won't dare to do that. If I die here, you should know the consequences. You should know that young Master Yi and the fifth dimension are in a terrible situation. If I die in the hands of young Master Yi, then young Master Yi will become enemies with Daoting and the Dao Tomb. Young Master Yi is so smart, he will not let himself and the fifth dimension fall into such a desperate situation, right?" Yi Xian shook his head. "You're wrong." As his voice fell, he suddenly slashed out with his sword. Li Banji's throat was directly split open. Li Banji's eyes were wide open as she stared at Yi Xian. Her eyes were filled with disbelief. She never thought that Yi Xian would really dare to kill her. How could Yi Xian be so brainless? How could this be? Was he not afraid of the Dao Tomb's revenge? A series of questions flashed through Li Banji's mind. At this time, Yi Xian suddenly smiled. "Miss Banji, from your expression, you seem a little surprised." Li Banji stared at Yi Xian. She wanted to inform the outside world, but she was firmly suppressed by Yi Xian's bloodline power. The current her could not mobilize even the slightest bit of her strength. If Yi Xian's bloodline power was outside, it would not be able to do anything to her. However, Yi Xian's bloodline power was inside her body. Right now, Yi Xian had dominated her body. As long as Yi Xian willed it, her body would immediately explode and she would die. Li Banji slowly closed her eyes. "Tell me, how are you going to deal with this? Let me die in peace." Yi Xian's right hand gently stroked Li Banji's cheek. "Miss Banji, I have to say, you are very beautiful. I can't bear to destroy such a beautiful woman." As he spoke, he slowly clenched his right hand. In an instant, a powerful force gathered in the palm of his hand. Li Banji looked at Yi Xian, waiting for Yi Xian's performance. At this time, a ruthless look flashed in Yi Xian's eyes. He punched himself. In an instant, a world-destroying power erupted from the secret chamber like a flood. Dao Fist. This time, Yixian used Dao Fist. As soon as this punch was thrown, the entire Dao tomb was shocked. When Yixian punched his chest, Li Banji was slightly stunned. Then she softly said, "Good plan." At this time, she already understood how Yixian was going to deal with the aftermath. Boom. As Yixian's punch landed on his chest, the entire secret chamber suddenly turned to ashes. At the same time, the space within a radius of tens of thousands of miles directly exploded at this moment. At the same time, Li Banji's body also exploded. Her spiritual soul was destroyed. The entire Dao tomb was shocked. Someone attacked the Dao tomb? Soon, countless experts arrived at the scene of the incident. The first to arrive was Zhu Jianshan. When he saw that the secret chamber had turned to ashes, Zhu Jianshan's face immediately became extremely ugly. He glanced around and in the next moment, he directly appeared in front of Yixian. At this moment, Yixian could be said to be a tragic sight. Yixian's body had already split open and blood flowed continuously. His aura was also extremely weak, as if he could die at any time. Zhu Jianshan did not care about Yixian. He glanced around and soon his face turned pale. Where was Li Banji? At this time, the experts of the Dao tomb also arrived at the scene. When they saw Yixian's appearance, all the experts of the Dao tomb were stunned. What is going on? Meanwhile, Zhu Jianshan suddenly lifted Yixian up, and he stared fixedly at Yixian. What's going on? Yixian didn't speak. Blood sprayed from his mouth repeatedly, and he seemed like he could die at any moment. An expert from the Dao tomb spoke in a low voice. His injuries are too severe. Zhu Jianshan spoke furiously. Where's Banji? Yixian still didn't answer him, and he just kept spitting blood. Zhu Jianshan intended to ask more questions, but an old man spoke abruptly. Calm down and heal him first. Zhu Jianshan stared fixedly at Yixian, and a short moment passed before he withdrew a medicinal pill and gave it to Yixian. As soon as he consumed the medicinal pill, Yixian's aura instantly became slightly stronger. Zhu Jianshan hurriedly asked, "Where's Banji?" Yixian glanced at the surroundings and was slightly dazed. "Where's Banji?" Zhu Jianshan's brows knit together slightly. Meanwhile, the old man spoke solemnly. "Young Master Yi, what exactly happened just now?" Yixian suddenly seemed to have gone mad. "Where's Banji?" As he spoke, he grabbed Zhu Jianshan's collar and roared furiously. "Where's Banji? Where's my Banji?" Zhu Jianshan was speechless. Everyone in the surroundings looked at each other. Suddenly, a middle-aged man spoke in a trembling voice. "Elder Zhu, the goddess's soul tablet has shattered." It had shattered. The expressions of all the experts here instantly changed drastically. Zhu Jianshan's face instantly turned pale as well. Meanwhile, Yixian suddenly roared furiously. "Her soul tablet has shattered? What do you mean? What do you mean?" As he spoke, he grabbed the middle-aged man and roared like a wild beast. "What do you mean by her soul tablet has shattered? Huh?" The middle-aged man hesitated for a moment before he spoke in a trembling voice. "Young Master Yi, the goddess has probably suffered misfortune." "Impossible!" Yixian suddenly roared furiously, and his voice was like a thunderclap that shook the sky. "Impossible! It's absolutely impossible for anything to have happened to Banji. It's absolutely impossible." At this moment, his voice wasn't just trembling, even his expression was filled with terror. It was like he'd lost the love of his life. The middle-aged man glanced at Yixian, sighed softly, and didn't dare speak another word. Meanwhile, Yixian suddenly held his head in his hands and howled, and his voice was filled with boundless sorrow. Zhu Jianshan suddenly spoke in a low voice. "Young Master Yi, what happened just now?" Everyone here gazed at Yixian, but Yixian was still howling with sorrow as if he was about to cry himself to death. All of them were speechless. Zhu Jianshan walked over to Yixian and spoke in a low voice. "Young Master Yi, what exactly happened just now?" Yixian suddenly raised his head, and at this moment his face was already covered in tears. Everyone looked at Yixian, who was already crying, and their hearts were quite complicated. This guy was indeed a sentimental person. Yi Xian spoke in a low voice. Just now, I entered the secret room with Banji, and Banji said that he had something important to tell me, but at this moment, a mysterious person suddenly appeared in the secret room, and then he punched. Speaking of this, there was a trace of fear in his eyes. I've never seen such a powerful punch. Just that punch, I was directly sent flying. Zhu Jianshan frowned slightly. Mysterious person? Yi Xian nodded. Yes, mysterious person. I couldn't see his true appearance. He was very close to me, but for some reason I just couldn't see his face. Speaking of this, he suddenly looked at Zhu Jianshan. I remember Banji said something. Zhu Jianshan hurriedly asked. What did he say? Yi Xian clenched his hands. Banji said, Dao, Dao. Hearing this, the faces of all the powerhouses suddenly became ferocious. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly said fiercely, Daoing. It must be doubting. Ah, Dao Yi Xian, swear to the heavens that I will not live under the same sky as you. Everyone, you're tuning in to the Wang Lin's Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.